Hey friends, before we dive into tonight's story, did you know that nearly 80% of viewers aren't subscribed? If you're enjoying this content, hit that subscribe button. It really helps keep these long stories coming. Also, for even more police horror stories, check out my new channel. The link's in the description and pinned comment. I'd love it if you stop by and subscribe. I'd love to hear from you. What time is it where you are and which city are you listening from tonight? Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into it. I climbed into the patrol unit just after midnight, dust still clinging to my boots from the last call. The rig's engine idled in the empty lot of a faded Love's truck stop outside Pecos. I remember how the neon sign overhead sputtered, each flicker humming like a bad heart. It was March, but the air already carried that dry heat you feel in every pore. One of those early desert mornings that makes you wonder if the world ever really cools down. I settled behind the wheel, the seatbelt's buckle clicking like a gunshot in the stillness. My partner had called in sick for the third time that week, so I was strapped in alone. Texas Highway Patrol, one man against the wide-open dark. My first check-in with dispatch came at 12:07 a.m. Highway 229, check your emergency lights, the dispatcher said. I flicked the switch, watching the blues and reds chase each other across the concrete. Nothing looked out of place. No stalled rigs, no wandering cattle. The CB radio hissed. I keyed the mic. 10-4, dispatch. A static-laced whisper answered me on a private channel I didn't recognize. You feel it yet? I frowned, glancing at the dust motes dancing in the cabin's yellow glow. I told them I heard nothing but staff chatter. They went silent, and I replayed the scratch in my earpiece, sure it was just bad wiring. I punched the unit back into drive and rolled onto the highway. 2 wheels on faded white lines, the other 2 on gravel that sounded like loose change in a jar. The rig's headlights cut through the dust, only enough to make the darkness beyond feel deeper. I passed an old barn that sat behind a chain-link fence, its board door hanging open, hinges rusted away. I slowed, expecting to see squatters or stray dogs. Nothing. No living thing stirred except for a piece of creosote-soaked timber swaying on a loose nail. The barn offered no warmth, no welcome, just a yawning hollow that echoed the emptiness of the night. My next radio call pinged in at 12:45 a.m. A broken-down 18-wheeler wondering if I could send a tow. I acknowledged, but when I drove to the location they'd marked, there was no truck in sight. The coordinates landed me on an access road that ended at a locked gate used to corral cattle. No footprints led down the road, only tractor treads from weeks ago, overgrown with tumbleweed. I called dispatch again. Negative on the rig. If they didn't move, they're not here. They said they'd verify. 5 minutes later, they cleared the call. No further action needed. By 1:32 a.m., I was halfway to Marathon, watching the Basil Griffin Bridge disappear behind me. The moon was a sliver above the horizon, hidden behind drifting haze. I felt that familiar ache behind my eyes, the one that sneaks up when everything's too quiet. I toggled on the dash cam, more habit than necessity, and leaned my head back. The radio spat broken phrases, weather updates, occasional trucker check-ins, nothing out of the ordinary. That's when I heard it. Heavy breathing through the static, like someone exhaling into a microphone pressed up against their mouth. The voice was low and ragged, an edge of panic or warning. I couldn't tell which. "Keep moving," it rasped. Then a click, and the breathing cut off. My spine stiffened. I looked around the cab as though I expected someone to emerge from the shadows between seats. "Dispatch, did you catch that?" I called, voice unsteady. Silence. Then, finally, negative, patrol. Nothing but open channel noise. I switched frequencies, tried to isolate the source. The hissing stopped, as if someone had pulled the plug. My heart thumped loud enough I was surprised the mic hadn't picked it up. I pressed on. Traffic dead, horizon bleeding that pale pink that meant sunrise was close enough to touch. At 2:05 a.m., I reached the outskirts of Alpine on US 90. The gas tech station sign read 24/7, but pumps were all dark, hoses coiled like sleeping snakes. I thought about grabbing coffee, needed something to keep me sharp, but the lone attendant inside didn't look up when I pulled in. I stepped out, hand on my holster, and walked to the glass door. My reflection rippled back at me. Tired eyes ringed with red, stubble graying at the jaw. I waved at the clerk, no response. I knocked, still nothing. I pressed the door handle, it swung open, the bell above jingling. Inside was empty, no coffee, no clerk, no customers, only stale air heavy with the scent of diesel and dust. I checked the registers, balanced till still locked. In the back storage room, a single chair faced a blank wall, like someone had been keeping watch. No footprints on the dusty floor. No evidence anyone had left in a hurry. Just an abandoned hush. My radio crackled again. Dispatcher asked if I'd check the station. I confirmed. "Roger," they said. And that was it. Another ghost call, logged and cleared. I left the building, slammed the door behind me. The desert's chill had risen, turning the air from warm to crisp in a heartbeat. My breath puffed in little clouds as I climbed back into the cruiser. I tried the engine, no turnover, just a click. I twisted the key again. The gauges flickered, died, lights out, no power. Nothing but darkness pressing in from all sides. I pounded the steering wheel, the truck stops and barns and broken rigs. I could outrun all that if the engine held. But now I was stranded at the gas pumps with the sun still an hour away, in a place named for its endless solitude. My phone had no bars. My radio was dead. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out, boots crunching on gravel. I shone the beam over the station and across the empty road, nothing alive in sight. That's when I heard it. A woman's laugh. Soft, distant, but unmistakable. Not a call for help, more like someone playing back an old recording of laughter. The sound dripped through the air, echoing off concrete and steel. I swung my light toward the highway. Nothing. The laugh floated again, closer, like someone walking just beyond the beam. I took a step forward. The laugh cut off, and a whisper followed. "You left me waiting." No echo, no reverberation, just that voice, flat and calm. A man's voice this time, older, tired. I spun in a circle, searching woodline and station canopy. Nothing moved. I called out, "This is Highway Patrol, you there?" My voice cracked in the chill. Silence answered. The only noise was distant cattle lowing, and the whisper of wind in empty tanks. I trudged back to the cruiser, shivering. When I tried the key again, the rig started, smooth, like nothing had gone wrong. Lights back on. CB radio static gave way to normal chatter. I sat there for a long minute, engine rumbling beneath me, heart hammering until I could feel it in my throat. Then I drove off, leaving the station behind. No footprints marked my exit. The laugh, the whisper, the dead engine, they were just memories now, stored in my mind like evidence no one would believe. I pulled off State Line Road at 3:14 a.m., nearing the Pecos River crossing. A single street lamp flickered overhead, casting the water in rusty orange. I leaned on the horn, standard protocol, make your presence known. No boaters this time, no stranded fishermen. Just that tilted lamppost and the river's slow murmur. I tapped the horn again, impatience creeping in. That's when I saw something drift beneath the surface, a shape gliding underwater just past the concrete barrier. I rolled down the window, wind rushing in. The shape paused, dark and still, then melted away into the current. I pressed my flashlight against the guardrail and swept the beam across the water. Nothing. No debris, no logs, only the slow swirl of muddy water. I cursed under my breath. If I reported this, they'd chalk it up to hallucination, fatigue, or river debris. The CAD log would reflect a routine check with no anomalies. I headed back toward town, engine idling steady, dashboard clock flipping to 3:22 a.m. Just 40 minutes left before shift change. Normally, I'd breathe easier, but by then I'd learned that nothing about these nights made sense. I tried to shake off the moments I couldn't explain. The breath through the radio, the ghost calls, the drowned laughter in the desert. I focused on the task. Keep roaming, keep listening, keep the highway safe. But as I cruised past empty fields where oil pumps winked like sleeping sentinels, I realized that the real danger wasn't in the bullets or the wrecks. It was in the things you saw in the stillness, the things you couldn't file in a report, the things that waited for you in the dark miles between calls. I didn't realize it then, but something was already pulling at me, threading itself into my days and nights. I'd carry that unease home, layer it into my dreams, until the day I couldn't tell where the road ended and the fear began. And for a man who's always believed in facts, in writing things down, in making sense of chaos, the next few months would test every conviction I had. But at 3:22 a.m., with the wind rattling the A-pillar and the world yawning awake somewhere over my shoulder, I just sat there and listened for the next whisper. I eased the cruiser onto FM 96.5 to catch the late-night news. Static-laced talk about wayward tumbleweeds delaying freight trains. But mostly, I let white noise fill the cab as I rolled back onto US 90 toward Sanderson. The clock read 3:45 a.m., but everything felt warped by fatigue, and the desert's yawning quiet. My eyes felt heavy, lids like paper taped shut, so I cracked the window a notch. The desert air hit me sharp, cold enough to jolt my senses awake. I thumbed at the dash cam's record light, still blinking red, still watching me, and leaned forward, chin braced between two calloused fists, scanning the horizon for movement. The road stretched out flat, unbroken, and I felt the cruiser's tires hum on the asphalt, a low rumble that should have been soothing. Instead, it felt like the engine itself was breathing. I tried to ignore it, but every time I blinked, the monitor flickered, and I thought I saw something step out of the scrub brush. Two legs, crouched low, then vanished when I glanced over. I shook it off as desert mirage, told myself it was nothing more than exhaustion tricking my eyes. But my fingers drummed an uneven rhythm on the steering wheel. Something was off about that stretch. No barn, no fence, just scrub as far as I could see. And yet, I'd sworn I passed a dilapidated farmstead there on the way out. At 3:58 a.m., a call crackled in. Unit 32. We've got a welfare check at County Road 235. Caller reports a lone figure pacing in front of an abandoned mobile home. Lights are on inside, but no one answers the door. I thumbed the microphone. Copy 32, en route. I flicked the cruiser's siren on low, just enough to alert anyone inside without spooking them. My headlights cut through the black, illuminating tumbleweed shaped like horseshoes. The mile markers flew past. 57, 58, 59. The mobile home appeared without warning, half buried in sand, windows dark and boarded, save for one panel ripped free. Light spilled out in a single rectangle, yellow, flickering like candlelight. I pulled up 20 yards out and killed the lights. CB static filled my ears, but no voices. The breathing had stopped earlier. The laughter in the gas station faded, replaced by heavy silence that pressed in on me. I grabbed my mag light and stepped out, boots squelching in soft earth. My badge caught moonlight as I flicked it toward the door before I knocked. 1, 2, 3 taps. Nothing. I knocked again, louder. "Sheriff's office, anybody in there?" My voice cracked. The door swung inward at my hand, slow, revealing an interior lit by a single table lamp. The furniture was ancient, a sagging couch, a metal TV stand, and on the far side a man pacing back and forth. He was tall, thin, a cowboy hat shadowing his face, but I recognized the silhouette from my dreams. Lanky arms folded, shifting weight, as though measuring every foot of that dusty carpet. He didn't look at me as I stepped inside. The air smelled of stale sweat and something metallic, like fresh warmed oil. I eased the door shut behind us. "Sir, you called 911? He stopped pacing and turned the slightest fraction, profile sharp as a knife. Without a word, he raised a bony finger to his lips, then pointed behind me. I spun, flashlight beam sweeping across the room. No one else there. But I felt a presence, a weight, pressing down. I turned back to the man. He'd vanished. The hat lay on the couch, brim cracked, sweat-darkened leather. My heart hammered so loud I punched at my chest, expecting to find a hole. I shone the light on the couch. The hat's band was damp, no rain, no explanation. I reached out to touch it. My glove came away smeared with oil, dark, slippery, as if the brim had been stuffed through a pump jack. I jerked my hand back, wiping it on my pant leg. My radio crackled. "Unit 32, are you with the party?" The dispatcher sounded concerned. Negative," I said, voice hoarse. "No one here." I swung around, searching hallway and doorways. The lamp flickered and went out, plunging me into darkness. The only light came from my mag light, beam narrow, shaking in my grasp. I cursed and clicked the lamp switch. A pop, then static from the radio, then the sound of someone exhaling deep and low, right behind me. I froze, hand tightening on the flashlight. The radio hissed. "We copy you, Unit 32. Please respond." But I didn't respond. I couldn't. I bolted for the door, lunging across the cracked linoleum. I didn't look back as I slammed it open and sprinted out to the cruiser. My boots hit the ground hard, scattering pebbles. I fumbled the keys and yanked the door open. Engine roared to life as though on cue. I peeled away, tires spitting gravel behind me. As I rounded the bend back to the highway, I glanced in the rear view. The mobile home's one-lit window glowed bright for a moment, then winked out. Back in the cruiser, I realized I'd left the mag light on the roof. I considered stopping, thought better of it. I needed to keep moving. I flicked the CB to the private channel. Heard only static and that ragged breathing. I switched off the CB and let the silence fill the cab again. I checked the clock, 4:12 a.m. Shift over in 18 minutes. I felt a thrill of relief, but it tasted bitter. The rest of the drive back to town was a blur. I made no more calls. I didn't answer dispatch. I just put my head down and watched the road. The dunes rose and fell like silent witnesses. A dog howled once, far off. I didn't stop. I didn't look. When I pulled into the station at exactly 4:30 a.m., I sat in the cruiser for a long minute, engine idling, eyes fixed on the slip-shaped shadow between the gate's bars. Finally, I climbed out, walked up the steps without looking around, and punched in the code to the side door. Inside, the station was empty. Lights dim, chairs flipped onto desks. I left the cruiser running and headed to the locker room. My uniform felt heavy, soaked with sweat and dust. I peeled it off, tossed it into the hamper. I splashed cold water on my face in the restroom mirror. I stared at that man. My face looked older, drawn, haunted. I leaned in, breathing hard. The mirror rippled as though someone tapped it from behind. I jerked back. Nothing there. I dressed in plain clothes, jeans and a worn flannel shirt that smelled like home and coffee. I grabbed my notebook and pens off the chief's desk. On the log sheet under Incidents, I wrote a single line. 4 a.m., mobile home welfare check. No subjects located. Area clear. I didn't mention the lamp, the hat, the breath. I didn't write about the figure. I left the page blank after that entry. An hour later, I sat in a folding chair in the break room, nursing a cup of black coffee. My hands trembled enough to spill a drop on the table. I lifted it to my lips and thought about going home. But home was where my dreams came alive with those whispers. Home was where my daughter's laughter filled rooms I no longer felt welcome in. I stared at the door to the evidence locker, where the CB mic was supposed to record every static-filled call. I wanted to check that tape, to hear what I'd heard. But if I did, if I listened, then logged it, I'd have to explain it. I'd have to answer why every record I tried to pull was wiped clean, why dispatch logs showed no record of that call. I cracked the handle on the evidence door. It clicked and swung open, empty. The shelves were bare, tags folded and thrown away, case numbers vanished. My coffee cup slipped from my hand, shattering on the tile. I watched the black liquid pool seeping into tiny cracks. I knelt, heart pounding, and ran a finger through the spill. It stuck to my skin like blood. My radio buzzed on the belt clip. I didn't reach for it. I watched the scalding coffee steam in the cold air as I realized I could never unsee those nights. I could never rewrite the logs. I could never prove what was real. And even if I walked out of that station with every piece of evidence in hand, the real question waiting outside would still go unanswered. I stood and tossed the coffee rag into the trash. My legs felt like lead, but I forced myself to walk out the front door. The sky was pale, first light bleeding over the horizon. I squinted against it, searching the silhouette of the station roof against the dawn. For a moment, everything was quiet. So quiet, I thought I heard someone whisper my name. I spun, expecting to find someone behind me, someone waiting to step out of the shadows. But there was no one. I stepped onto the cracked pavement, boots crunching on the thin layer of sand that had blown in overnight. Dawn's pale fingers reached across the sky, painting the west in soft amber. I paused, letting the cold light settle in my bones. The station's outline loomed behind me, its flat roof and peeling paint more familiar now than any place at home. I forced myself to keep walking, chest tight, lungs burning as though I'd sprinted a block. My eyes flicked to the horizon, where the empty highway snaked toward who knows where, promising both freedom and whatever had followed me all night. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Dispatch checking on my status. I didn't answer. If I spoke, answered their questions, I'd have to admit the truth. That I'd been to that mobile home, that I saw him, that I heard the breathing again, close enough to feel on my neck. Instead, I turned onto South Main, footsteps echoing against boarded-up storefronts. I passed the cafe where the cook usually had a pot of coffee ready by now, black and bitter, with enough grounds in the bottom to scrape. Today, I passed it without stopping. The scrapes and swings of morning life felt alien, like someone had let daylight into a nightmare and nothing fit. I reached my pickup in the lot behind the station, the blue and white paint worn down to primer in places. I kept the engine off and slid in behind the wheel, letting the seat cradle me. The radio static hummed, familiar and benign. No whispers, no laughter, no breathing that didn't belong. I exhaled, slow, realizing my heart was still racing. I flicked the dome light off and slipped the key into the ignition. The engine turned over smooth, and I let it idle for a moment. Listening to its steady rumble reminded me that some things still made sense. By 5:10 a.m., I was on FM 94.7, tuning into a local AM simulcast. A preacher's voice droned about faith and redemption, stuff I'd listened to after tough shifts, hoping something bigger might steady me. But this morning, the words fell flat, like a sermon in an empty church. I thumbed down the dial, landing on silence. I sat that way for a long minute, staring at the steering wheel, the dashboard, the empty seats. I recalled the man in the mobile home, the oil on the hat brim, the smell of sweat, and I realized that something inside me had shifted overnight. I wasn't just tired, I was unmoored. I drove into town proper, just as the sun cracked fully above the rooftops. The bank's neon signs blinked off. Coffee shops opened their doors, and delivery trucks lumbered through the streets. People moved with purpose. Heading to work, school kids filing past, joggers weaving from sidewalk to road. I watched them, wondering if any of them carried a piece of last night's darkness inside, if any had heard that ragged breath. I rolled through a stoplight on 3rd and Elm, the cruiser's tinted windows making me invisible. I caught my reflection for a second. Uniform hanging off me like a shroud, eyes glazed, mouth stiff. For a moment, I didn't recognize the man behind the wheel. At the courthouse parking lot, I swung in and parked. The place was buzzing already. Ankle-biting lawyers, deputies swapping shift stories, the judge's SUV idling by the entrance. I stepped out, clipped my badge back on, and walked toward the east entrance. My stride was tight, shoulders hunched, as though I expected something to pounce at the threshold. Inside the lobby, I passed a row of water fountains and a metal detector. The security guard nodded, absently scanning bags with an X-ray machine. I didn't offer my bag for inspection. Deputies usually got a pass. I kept my eyes forward and moved into the hallway. I reached the records office and tapped on the frosted glass door marked Dispatch Transcripts. I'd been here plenty, requesting tapes, copying logs. Today, I needed to know, had the data from last night vanished like the others? I stepped inside. The clerk looked up. "Morning, deputy." Her voice was bright, unaware. I offered a tight smile. "Morning. I'd like to pull the tapes from 0000 to 0500 on the AM frequency for last night. Channel 12. She nodded and hit the keyboard. Her fingers paused, eyes narrowing at the screen. She scrolled, then frowned. "Deputy, there's nothing from..." She hesitated, then added, "Last night. The archive ends at 23:59. There's a gap." I felt the heat rise in my chest. "A gap?" I said, voice low. "Logs show tape ended before midnight, and nothing new starts until shift change at 0400. She shook her head. "Looks that way. No system errors." Her face screwed up. "I can file an IT ticket. Maybe the server rebooted?" I exhaled, tipping my head back. "Number, everything else is intact?" She checked again. "Registers, camera feeds, digital files. Just that one tape segment missing." My jaw clenched. "Thanks," I said, turning toward the door. I left the courthouse and stepped back into the sun-soaked street. A heat haze rose off the pavement, and cars sped by, tinted windshields reflecting blinding glare. I shaded my eyes, watching the sky. I understood then that I was chasing something that didn't want to be found. The tape had been erased, deliberately, and not just last night's. Every time I tried to pull a log, a call, A record that captured the voice on the CB, it was gone. Clean, like someone had planned it. I walked to my cruiser in the lot, unlocked the door, and climbed in. I eased the vehicle onto the thoroughfare, heading back toward the station. As I drove, I thought about my options. I could report the missing tapes, force a county inquiry. But that would mean going up against people higher up, people who had the power to bury evidence and bury me with it. I thought about my family, about the quiet mornings with my daughter, her small hands clutched to mine as we walked to school. I thought about the wreck I pulled a month ago, how the driver never saw the oil sheen on the road until it was too late. I'd thought it was an accident, until I came back and found the spill mysteriously cleaned minutes after I left. I gripped the wheel, knuckles white. The pavement blurred beneath me. By the time I turned onto the frontage road that led back to the station's rear entrance, I felt sick, like I'd swallowed rust and grit. I parked and sat for a moment, engine ticking as it cooled. The sun was high now, heat creeping inside the cab. I rolled down the window and let it wash over me, stinging my eyes. A patrol car swept past, lights off, and I caught the reflection of its side mirror. The Texas star, crisp and white. A reminder of who I was, what I'd sworn to uphold. I reached for my phone, tapped my wife's name. My thumb hovered over the call button. I could tell her what I'd found. I could ask for help. I could risk everything to pursue a truth that maybe didn't even exist. My thumb trembled. In my mind, I heard the raspy voice again. Keep moving. I lowered my phone. I climbed out of the cruiser and locked the door. The station loomed behind me, a fortress of concrete and glass. I walked up the ramp and punched in my badge number at the electronic gate. Inside, the hallway was empty, cool air conditioning humming from vents overhead. I passed the roll call room, chairs stacked on tables, echoing floor. I passed the lieutenant's office, lights off. I passed the bulletin boards littered with missing person posters and wanted faces. Everything was as it should be, except for those missing logs, those erased whispers. I reached the break room where last night's coffee mug sat on the counter, forgotten and stained. I picked it up, turning it in my hands. There was a faint imprint, oil slick on the bottom, dried to a dark halo. My reflection stared back, haunted. I set the mug down and crossed to the refrigerator, opening the door. Inside, the usual beer and leftovers. I grabbed a bottle of water and twisted the cap. I took a long drink, letting it wash down, cool and clear. The taste grounded me for a moment. Then I heard it, a soft thump behind the break room door, like someone dropping something. I froze, chest tight. Water halfway to my mouth, I held it there. The thump came again, low and deliberate. I set the water on the counter and edged toward the door, hand hovering near my hip. I knocked once. The door swung open at my touch. Inside was the evidence locker, still empty. Tags strewn on the floor like confetti. But on the top shelf, where our shift log binders lived, lay a small, leather-bound journal. It wasn't mine. The cover was scuffed, the spine creased. I recognized the look. It belonged to someone who carried it everywhere. I picked it up, flipping it open. The pages were filled with neat entries. Dates, mileage, weather conditions. And then, at 2:45 a.m., in a spidery scrawl, figure at the pump. Hat. Oil. They're watching. Must keep moving. Below that, a new entry. Dispatch line dead. Tape erased. Next time I'll bring my own recorder. My blood ran cold. The entries were dated weeks ago, spanning before I ever saw the gas station laugh. The writer wasn't me. It was the missing deputy, Lopez, the one who stopped talking after that shift on Chinati Road. I snapped the journal shut. The spine cracked. I felt hands tremble as I held it. Behind me, the vending machine in the hallway buzzed to life. Lights flickering, motor whirring. I jumped, heart pounding. I slipped the journal into my jacket and stepped back into the hallway, footsteps echoing. The station was quiet again, but I knew better. I knew that whatever had haunted me that night had a history, a trail that led back through erased tapes and vanished deputies, and now I held the proof. I just had to figure out what to do with it before it, and I, were erased next. I slipped the leather-bound journal into my inside pocket and stepped back into the hallway, heart pounding so fiercely I expected someone to hear it miles away. The morning sun filtered through the high windows, slanting across linoleum tiles and casting long, crooked shadows. I paused at the bulletin board, stared at the missing person posters of deputies I'd known. Deputy Lopez on Chinady Road, veteran narc Rosa Marquez in Uvalde, rookie Carter Fields out by Lajitas. Their faces stared back at me, eyes wide, frozen in time. We were supposed to protect people like that. Now, I was chasing their ghosts. Without a breath, I crossed to the lieutenant's office and pushed the door ajar. The lieutenant looked up from his paperwork, startled. "Deputy, what are you doing in here?" His voice was low, wary. I shoved the journal onto his desk. "You know this?" His eyes flicked to the cover, then back to me. "Where'd you find it?" I said nothing. He cracked the journal open, brows knitting as he scanned the entries. This belonged to Lopez." He whispered the name, as though saying it out loud might summon her. Lopez went missing 2 months ago." I nodded. "And every call he logged after that is gone. His tapes, his reports, erased." The lieutenant's face paled. He closed the journal slowly. "If this leaves this room, you're initiating a departmental investigation." I braced myself. "Good," I said quietly. "Because people are dying, or worse, they're disappearing." He stood, jaw set. "All right," he said. "Let's get some coffee and figure this out." He reached for his radio. "Dispatch, tell him 32 needs the conference room for an hour." He glanced at me, urgency flashing in his eyes. "We're off the books until then. Don't mention this to anyone else." I exhaled the breath I'd been holding. "Understood." We left the office and made our way to the small kitchenette at the end of the hall. The lieutenant filled 2 styrofoam cups from the coffee machine, dark and steaming. I peeled open a sugar packet, stirred until the grains dissolved. He placed the journal between us, flipped it open to the first entry. December 3rd, 2024, 1:47 a.m. Something's here. I can feel it outside the rig. We read in silence, each line another knot tightening in my gut. There were notes about distorted dashcam footage, comments on phantom calls to dispatch, sketches of that same broad-shouldered figure outside the mobile home. At the bottom of the page, a final entry. "They're watching me. If I stop, I'm dead. I have to keep moving. Must keep moving." The lieutenant looked up, eyes haunted. "He stopped moving," he said. And then, it was like he vanished. I clenched my cup, knuckles white. "He tried to warn us," I said, "but no one was listening." In that moment, I realized the truth. The thing that stalked us wasn't human. It used our own systems, our radios, our logs, to erase its trail. It turned our technology against us, rewriting history so that no one would ever believe the bad nights we lived through. It fed on the silence between calls, the gaps in our records. And every time we thought we were safe, every flicker of a neon sign, every echo of static, it was watching. I drained my coffee, the bitter warmth spreading through me. Outside, the station's doors rattled as a gust of wind kicked up sand from the highway. We stood, gathering the journal. The lieutenant tucked it beneath his arm. "We have to move now," he said, "before it realizes we know." I nodded. We stepped out into the open air, boots crunching on the concrete ramp. Ahead lay the road, endless and indifferent under the bright Texan sun. Behind us, the station's windows gleamed. I wanted to turn back, to lock the doors and pretend none of this was real. But I couldn't unsee the entries, couldn't unhear the breathing. I drew in a steadying breath and followed the lieutenant to his cruiser. I slid in beside him as he started the engine. The journal lay between us on the console, its pages waiting. We rolled onto the frontage road, then onto FM 94.7, the open highway beckoning. The CB radio crackled to life with routine chatter. Truckers checking in, dispatch routing traffic, static riding the waves like restless ghosts. I didn't touch the mic. I watched the miles unspool, the sun climbing, dust swirling in our wake. I thought about the 7 sections of my report, the calls I answered, the logs I filed, the nights I spent hoping nothing would happen. Each one was a lie. The lieutenant pressed his palm against the journal's cover. "We'll get to the bottom of this," he said firmly. "But if we're right, if this has been going on for years, we're going to need help." I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of every missing deputy, every vanished call. "Who can we trust?" I asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he flicked the CB to the private channel. Silence at first, then, unmistakable, a breath. Low, ragged, and adult, like someone gearing up for a long race. And beneath it, clearer than ever, "Keep moving." I looked at the lieutenant. His face was grim, but his eyes were steady. "Yes," he said into the mic, voice low. "We're moving." And with that, we accelerated into the desert highway, 2 patrol cars side by side, chasing a truth too big to fit in any report, determined to follow it down to the last vanished deputy, no matter where it led. Behind us, the broken pumps and the empty mobile home faded into the distance. Ahead, the horizon stretched, endless and unforgiving. And in the hush between engines we could almost hear it. A final whisper, promising that some stories never end, that some questions linger forever in the dark miles of a Texas graveyard shift. I kept pace beside the lieutenant's cruiser as he eased onto the 2-lane stretch of FM 94.7, the leather-bound journal laid open on the passenger seat between us. The pages trembled in the morning breeze that leaked through the window. I watched the asphalt unfurl beneath the tires, saw the thin gray line split the red dirt, and in my mind I replayed each vanished call, each erased tape, each missing deputy. Our headlights carved a path through the haze of dust rising off the roadside scrub. The horizon was empty, no barns, no fences, just a straight shot toward whatever lay beyond. We rode in silence until we came upon the junction for County Road 235, the turnoff to the abandoned mobile home where I'd first seen that silhouette. The lieutenant signaled, slowing the cruiser to a crawl. I let him take point, gripping the journal as though it might slip from the console and vanish like so many records before. As we passed, the crude wooden sign marking CR 235, our tires crunched on loose gravel, and the lieutenant killed the headlights, letting the cruiser's tail lamps glow like embers in the gathering heat. I clicked off the CB, no static, no breath, just the hum of an engine winding down. We stepped out, flashlights drawn. The first dull beam struck the mobile home's bent metal siding, kicking up motes of dust. The lieutenant pocketed the journal and ran a hand over the widow's peak of chipped paint. "I wish we'd brought backup," he muttered. I checked my holster, empty. This wasn't a crime scene we could cordon. This was something older, something that played us like records in a scratched jukebox. The door still hung ajar on twisted hinges. Inside, the single lamp socket was shattered. its bare wires snaking across the floor like exposed veins. The couch sagged under the weight of memories, and the cowboy hat lay under the coffee table, brim pressed flat and stained with oil. I crouched, running my fingers along the edge of the leather journal until I found the entry that mentioned this place, dated weeks before Deputy Lopez's disappearance. February 15th, 2025, 2 a.m. Woke in my cruiser, thought I heard my name on the wind. Drove here meant to log a call for welfare check. Something in the walls breathing. I can't leave until I know it's gone. I looked up at the lieutenant. He came here before me, I said softly. He knew. The lieutenant's flashlight flicked toward the far corner, where the fluorescent lines of the dash cam's recorded echoes had once played back Lopez's own static-laced ramblings. "Anything there?" he asked. I clicked the beam across the dusty floor. Nothing but footprints leading to the exterior. No sign we were meant to stay inside. I stood and backed out onto the porch, letting the wood groan under my weight, following Lopez's unseen path back to her cruiser. Outside, the wind rose, stirring the brim of the hat. We both watched as the ranch jacket draped it, limp as a rag. I bent and scooped it up, fingers digging into the damp band where oil had stained leather. The lieutenant checked his flashlight, beam unfocused, then sputtered and died. I heard static snap to life in my pocket, my phone's notification. Weather alert, high winds expected. The message ended and the screen went dark. I raised my gaze to the sky, no clouds, just that relentless sun peaking low, gunning its heat like a spotlight. We climbed back into our cruisers, the hat and journal stashed safely inside. Engines purred awake, and we rolled back onto the highway, heading south toward Presidio. That drive was the longest 60 miles I've ever traveled. Hot glass underfoot, flat plains stretching endless. I studied the journal again, noting how each entry ended with the same note. Must keep moving. Lopez, Marquez, Fields, they'd all scribbled similar mantras before vanishing. I realized the phrase was like a prayer or a warning, move or be consumed. At the Presidio County line, we stopped for fuel. I stayed in the car, nursing a bottle of water while the lieutenant filled both tanks. Through the cracked window, I saw him pocket the journal, each motion deliberate. When he climbed back in, I asked, "What now?" He glanced at me, eyes grim. "Now we find out who's been erasing the logs." I exhaled. The deeper we dig, the emptier the records get. He nodded. Then we go analog. No more relying on dispatch, no more trusting the CB. We collect our own data, video, audio, witness statements. We put pen to paper and vanish into the dusty towns until someone sees us coming. My throat tightened. We'll piss off half the people in our own department. He tapped his badge. Better they hate us than let another deputy disappear. He flicked on the dash cam. This one mounted externally to the cruiser, recording to a hidden hard drive. "You ready?" I swallowed and nodded. "Ready." We pulled away from the fuel island, heading east on FM 170 toward Lajitas, a ghost town turned weekend getaway, but deserted at this hour. The desert closed in around us, mountains sharpening against the scorching sky. My partner cut the air with the cruiser's tires as we turned off the main road onto a narrow service track that led into the Davis Mountains foothills. I flicked on my flashlight and scanned the horizon, noting the shifting shadows beneath basalt outcroppings and mesquite thickets. The journal rested on my lap, its pages promising both answers and damnation. By the time we found the rusted remains of an old ranger station, just a crumbling foundation and a lone rusted mailbox, we agreed to split up. The lieutenant took the cruiser to circle around, keeping watch. I moved toward the brush, flashlight beam on high. Lopez's entry about an oil well accident came to mind. January 30th, 2025, 1:15 a.m., called to the old Jones oil field. Ruptured pipeline. When I got there, the leak was stopped. No spill, no tape, no call record. But I saw something. Shadows under the rig, mouths moving without sound. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of petroleum. I approached the skeletal pump jack, its arm frozen mid-swing. My pulse quickened as I crouched beside it, examining fresh footprints in the mud, boot treads leading beneath the rig's platform and disappearing into the darkness. I reached out, fingers brushing wet soil. Oil or water, I couldn't tell. I heard my heartbeat in my ears, louder than the wind. I stood, flashlight searching the skeleton's every limb. No sign of anyone or anything that could have made those tracks. A crackle came over the lieutenant's handheld radio. Unit 32? You copy? I keyed the mic, voice tight. I'm here. Found prints at the rig. No one around. Static filled the speaker. Then unmistakable. A breath, slow, deliberate, followed by a whisper. Keep moving. I dropped the radio in shock. The call died. Static left buzzing. I spun toward the rig, flashlight dancing across support beams and rusty pipes. Shadows stretched like fingers. The wind kicked again, and I imagined hearing laughter. Distant, hollow, as though the desert itself echoed with mockery. I shivered, adrenaline spiking. I fumbled for the radio, dead battery, no counters, no record. I realized, with a sinking dread, that any evidence I left here, prints, notes, recordings, would vanish before morning. I hit the cruiser's horn, a sharp blast that scattered birds from the brush. In the headlight glare, I saw movement at the edge. A figure, broad-shouldered, standing still as stone. I raised my light, nothing but dust and heat. The horn cut off. In the beam's center, I saw the hat, Lopez's hat, sitting on the ground, brim skewed, band frayed. I dropped to my knees, reaching for it, mind racing. But before I could touch it, the ground trembled. The rig groaned. I scrambled back as the pump jack began to move, slowly, rhythmically, as though powered by an unseen force. Gear teeth scraped metal, echoing across the field. I stumbled backward, tripping over a pipe. The hat slid beneath the rig, swallowed in darkness. I scrambled up, heart pounding. The lieutenant's cruiser rounded the bend, lights sweeping across the scene. I waved, panting, "We're done here!" He stopped and jumped out, flashlight raised. Together, we watched the rig's arm swing for one more arc, then grind to a halt. The line of the setting sun glowed behind it, a red smear over black steel. No footprints led away, no tape recorded, no dispatch log captured the trembling of the earth. I turned to the lieutenant. He aimed his beam at the rig. "We got what we came for," he said quietly. "We saw it move." I pressed a hand to my chest, trying to calm my racing heart. "How do we prove this, sir?" He stared at the rig, then at me. "We don't." He clicked his flashlight off. "We just keep moving." And with that, we climbed back into our cruisers, feeling the weight of every erased file, every vanished deputy pressed down on us like the desert's own heat. The highway lay ahead, endless, unforgiving, and full of promises no one would ever record. I didn't sleep that afternoon. I pulled an all-nighter, eyes locked on the horizon, as the lieutenant drove us back toward town in silence, the leather-bound journal closed tight on the seat between us like a sleeping beast. By the time dawn cracked over the highway, casting long shadows that trailed across the cracked asphalt, we were both so wound tight we kept expecting the world to fracture under the strain. I watched the sun rise higher, felt its heat bake through the patrol cruiser's windows, and wondered how long it would take before even daylight couldn't chase away what had followed us. We pulled into the station just as the morning shift arrived. Blinking new faces, folding chairs upright on desks, commanders in pressed uniforms greeting each other with polite indifference. We stayed in the cruiser until the lieutenant keyed his mic. "Dispatch 32 to the chief's office," he said. I felt sweat bead at my hairline, hands damp against my thighs. The lieutenant hit the dash cam's cover switch. Outside recording only. Whatever we said in the chief's office wasn't going on any official record. In the hallway, I caught glimpses of day shift deputies filing past, their radios clipped neatly to belts, laughter and coffee-smelling breath filling the air. I forced a steady breath, reminding myself they didn't need to know. They'd never believe. We climbed the stairs to the chief's office, brass plaque gleaming in the fluorescent light. The lieutenant paused outside, placed a hand on the door. I placed mine over his, matching pressure, solid, deliberate. We pushed in. The chief sat behind a mahogany desk, gray hair combed flat, expression unreadable. He looked up at us, drained coffee mug at his elbow, stack of reports neatly arranged. "Gentlemen," he said, "you asked to see me?" The lieutenant moved, to set the journal on the desk, opening it to Lopez's final entry. March 2nd, 2025, 3:22 a.m. If I don't leave this here, no one will ever believe. Keep moving, they're always listening. The chief's eyes flicked to the words, then to us. He ran a hand over the page. "Where did you get this?" the chief asked, voice low. The lieutenant rattled through a concise account of missing calls, erased tapes, the mobile home, the barn, the pump jack, the shape in the water, and every time we tried to log it, the record vanished. The chief's face remained stoic, but I saw the indefinable flicker of disbelief, or perhaps recognition in his eyes. When we finished, the chief leaned back, fingertips pressed together. He closed the journal. "Let me be clear," he said quietly. "I believe you. In my time, I've seen a lot of things that make no sense, and I'd rather move forward on a hunch than bury it. But you understand the gravity? If we bring this up, county, state, federal, it becomes a conspiracy, a liability. We're dealing with something that doesn't just erase evidence, it erases trust." He paused, letting the words settle like dust on the furniture. "So, here's what we'll do." He outlined a plan, a small task force, off the books, limited to the three of us. We'd rotate watches, keep analog records in handwritten journals, use personal recorders locked in our own safes, and meet in secret locations. We'd cross-reference notes, follow leads to every call about ghostly figures or unexplained static, from Marathon to Presidio. No radios, no dispatch, just old-school detective work. Boots on the ground, eyes open, pens and paper. I felt a surge of urgency mixed with dread. I'd signed up for law and order, for reports filed by the book. Now I was front and center in a story that made no sense, chasing something that fed on our certainty. Yet I nodded, steeling myself. The chief slid the journal toward me. "You're in charge of logistics," he said. "Gather the footage you have, make copies on tape, analog, and keep the original locked here." He pointed to a small safe behind his desk. The lieutenant exhaled, wiped his brow. "We won't fail," he said flatly. The chief gave a curt nod. Dismissed. We left the office with the weight of a dozen missing names trailing behind us. In the elevator, I realized my knees were shaky. The lieutenant patted my shoulder. "Coffee?" he offered. I managed a short laugh. God, yes. We went to the break room, the one with the jittery fluorescent lights and broken Keurig. I ground beans by hand, brewed a pot strong enough to bite, stirred in enough sugar to numb my teeth. As we sat at the folding table, scrap paper strewn with scribbled GPS coordinates and shift logs, I thought about what lay ahead. We'd need willing witnesses, truckers who'd heard the whispers, ranchers who'd seen the shape in the highway headlight glare, border officers who'd logged calls that never made the radio tape. We'd knock on doors, drive gravel roads, chase horizon line illusions, always watching for that figure to step out of the brush. And every time we approached, it would slip away, leaving only a hat or a breath or a circle of oil on the ground. By mid-morning, the lieutenant was testing the analog recorder he'd smuggled in, switching it on, holding it to the CB speaker, waiting for static. Nothing happened. He clicked it off with relief. "Better safe than sorry," he said. I copied notes into my own journal. Blue ink, neat print. Task force established. Chief's orders. Analog records active. Meeting point at 2100 hours. Abandoned border chapel. All entries to be documented by pen only. I closed the notebook and placed it in my jacket pocket. Afternoon sun baked the parking lot when we cleared out. I headed for the door when my phone buzzed. A number I didn't recognize. I answered, half expecting dispatch. Instead, a voice, low, ragged. "You're wasting time." My blood ran cold. "Who is this?" I grit out. Silence. Then the whisper, unmistakable. "Keep moving." The line went dead. I dropped the phone into my pocket, heart pounding so hard I thought the lieutenant might hear it through my chest. I stepped outside and saw him waiting by the cruiser, engine idling. He met my eyes, and without words we both understood. This wasn't just a threat, it was a reminder. We had to keep going, or be swallowed by the emptiness behind those crinkled shadows. We climbed aboard, doors thudding shut. The world beyond the station spun in harsh clarity. Surveying it now, I saw how everyone else carried on, oblivious. We turned onto the highway, heading toward the border chapel the chief mentioned. An old mission church, half fallen, red dirt yard, stained glass shattered. It would be quiet there, safe for our meeting. I glanced at the lieutenant. He caught my eye. No smile, just that same flat resolve. The cruiser's headlights cut through the heat haze, carving a narrow path forward. I thumbed my phone back on, but the screen stayed blank. No missed calls, no messages. As if the device, too, had been scrubbed. I slipped it into my pocket and opened my jacket, fingers brushing the blue-inked journal stub I'd tucked inside yesterday. Real words, real ink, safe from digital erasure. I closed my hand around it, feeling the thickness of those pages, proof that something happened, something witnessed, something worth chasing. We drove on, the pavement stretching toward the horizon. The empty pasture on our right gave way to mesquite brush, then to the chapel's crumbling silhouette, black against the late afternoon sky. We slowed, lights off, creeping toward a doorway where moonlight would pool later. The quiet pressed in, so complete I could almost hear my own thoughts rattling in my skull. I killed the engine. We sat in darkness, side by side, listening to wind-whisk tumbleweed across open ground. A distant crow called. I opened my door to step out, and my foot hit something hard. The lieutenant's phone, screen cracked, buried in dust. He sighed and scooped it up, turning it over. On the back, in pencil, someone had scrawled, "Stay bright, stay alive." No signature. I pocketed it. He reached for the journal, now our precious cargo, and locked eyes with me. "Are you ready?" he asked, voice low. I swallowed. Ready. He cracked his door open into the brilliant sky. I followed him into the yard. The chapel doors hung ajar, splintered oak panels swinging in the breeze. We stepped inside, boots echoing on cracked tile, light streaming through fractured glass onto stone pews worn smooth. We moved to the front, journal open, as though we could summon whatever lurked here with pen and paper. Outside, the wind died. The chapel's silence deepened until it felt alive. And that's when we heard it. Not in the radio, not in the static, but in the quiet resonance of the chapel itself. A slow exhale, as if the building itself were breathing. We froze, breath caught. The lieutenant's flashlight swept the altar. I stood too still to even blink. Then the whisper curled through the air, soft and intimate. "You can't stop me." We stood, two officers armed only with ink and courage, names on our badges that no bureaucrat could erase. We faced the emptiness, the breach in reality that had swallowed deputies whole, that had hollowed our logs and erased our past. We had nothing left but each other and the determination to keep moving. I scribbled my final note of the day in the margin of the journal. Here, in the dust of a dying chapel, the void speaks. I closed the cover, my hand shaking enough to crease the leather. The lieutenant clicked off his flashlight. We stepped back into the blinding afternoon, the world outside going on without missing a beat. We reached the cruisers, loaded the journal into the center console, and climbed in. Engines roared to life. Before pulling out, I saw the chapel doors swing shut on their own, casting the yard back into stillness. No footsteps, no echo, just that lingering moment where I felt, more than heard, the breath of that in-between world. As the cruisers rolled forward onto the highway, away from the mission, I glanced at my partner. He caught my eye, and in that look, I understood there was no turning back. We had become part of a story that had no final chapter, a question that stretched on through every dark mile. And the only way to chase it, every flicker of sign, every erased footstep, was to keep moving. I eased the cruiser onto the dirt access road that led away from the mission chapel, the gravel crunching beneath the tires like dry bones. Inside, the lieutenant stabbed at the journal's spine, flipping pages until he reached the next unexamined entry. March 15th, 2025, 2:53 a.m. Saw movement off the shoulder near Koyanosa. Pulled over. Nothing there except tire tracks leading into the scrub. Heard tires spinning. I checked my dash cam. Footage looped back on itself. He closed the book with a soft snap. "Koyanosa," he muttered. "That's 30 miles east. We'll go there next." I nodded, voice gone quiet, as though saying anything aloud would shatter the fragile thread we were following. The sky overhead had turned a brilliant, scorching blue, but the air in the cruiser felt stale and heavy, laden with the residue of last night's unease. We drove in silence, the only sound the engine's low thrum and the wind rattling loose trim around the windows. Each mile carried us deeper into territory I'd once patrolled alone, now feeling foreign, loaded with anticipation like a coiled spring. I stared out the passenger window at endless mesquite and creosote bushes, at oil wells pumping slowly in the distance, casting long, skeletal shadows over the red earth. Halfway to Koyanosa, the lieutenant tapped his fingers against the steering wheel. "We need eyes on the ground as soon as we get there. No cruisers, only foot patrol, and we document everything by hand. Hand." His voice was calm but carried an edge that made me sit up straighter. I reached into my jacket and pulled out my own journal, blue ink pen clipped to the cover. I tapped it twice. He met my gaze, and for a moment his eyes flickered with something I hadn't seen before, determination mingled with fear. "Agreed," I said quietly. When we turned west onto County Road 112, the pavement ended and the dirt track began, its surface pocked and uneven. The cruiser lurched over ruts, and I gripped the journal so hard I felt the leather buckle beneath my fingers. I watched the horizon, imagining Deputy Lopez's own headlights sweeping across this same stretch, trying to catch a stranger in the dark. The lieutenant cut the engine at a fork in the road marked only by a faded cattle marker nailed to a mesquite tree. "This is our spot," he said, pointing to a footpath that led into scrubland. "Start here." I nodded and clicked off the headlights, plunging us into sudden darkness. We climbed out, the door's slam echoing like a gunshot in the void. I checked my personal recorder, analog tape, fresh reel loaded, switch flipped to on. A red light blinked once, twice. I clicked my pen, opening my journal to a new page and writing the date, my location, my time. Then I looked up at the lieutenant, and we stepped off the edge of the track into the choking mesquite, boots sinking in loose gravel. The sky was a canvas of stars, bright pricks that did nothing to dispel the dark that pressed in around us. I led the way, stepping quietly on half-buried rocks, scanning for fresh tracks. The lieutenant followed close, his own flashlight carving a narrow cone of light through the brush. After 5 minutes, I crouched beside a patch of crushed earth where grass had been flattened. I leaned forward, tracing impressions with a gloved finger. 2 sets of boot treads, one slightly wider than the other, both heading northeast toward a lone oil pump. "Here," I whispered, pointing. "Tracks match Lopez's description, 6x2, Walker brand." The lieutenant knelt beside me, bringing his light to bear. "And these?" he said, pointing to shallow indentations in the dirt, circular, spaced like footsteps from someone kneeling. He touched one rim lightly. My breath caught at the metallic warmth of oil seeping from the edges. "She was here," he said. "I recorded it all. Time, coordinates, weather, dry, wind from the northwest at 10 miles per hour. Temperature 58 degrees. I noted the smell on the tracks. Oil mixed with creosote and the faint but unmistakable trace of something burned. We followed the boot prints to the pump jack, its arm frozen in mid-stroke under a canopy of stars. I squatted, lifted a loose rock, and pressed it to my nose. The metal scent was stronger here, as though the ground had been soaked in lubricant. I snapped a photo on my phone, purposefully, despite knowing the digital file would vanish, just to see if any trace remained. The image flickered on the screen for a moment, then faded to black. "That's our signal," the lieutenant said softly. "It's marking these sites." I stood, heart pounding, and shone my light across the flat fields. "But why?" I asked, voice low. He didn't answer. Instead, he pointed to the tree line, where a piece of fabric snagged on a branch fluttered in the faint breeze. Dark blue, almost black, a strip torn from a uniform shirt. I caught a glimpse of a badge patch stitched onto the cloth, the Texas Highway Patrol star, half peeled and faded. "She left this," he whispered. "Prove she was here." I reached out, fingers trembling, and plucked the fabric free. It felt brittle, like dried leather. I slipped it into a Ziploc bag from my bag, then into my pocket. A branch snapped nearby, and we froze. My chest tightened, adrenaline spiking. The lieutenant raised his weapon, not drawn, but held ready, flashlight mounted on the barrel. The beam swept the clearing. I felt breath on the back of my neck, warm and ragged. But when I spun, nothing was there. The mesquite stand was empty, its shadows still as stone. A distant insect buzzed. Then the sound of an engine, low and throaty, revving on the dirt road behind us. We ducked behind the pump jack's base, crouching low. The cruiser's headlights appeared, then brake lights, illuminating the mesquite in an eerie glow. A pickup truck rolled into view, tires kicking up dust. It slowed and stopped 15 yards away. The driver's side window cracked open. A figure leaned out. A middle-aged man in coveralls, sweat-slicked. eyes wide as he stared at us. "Y'all lost?" he called, voice thick with concern. Or was it accusation? I stepped out, hands raised. "Sir, identity unit." I reached into my jacket for my badge. The man's eyes flicked to the badge patch in my hand. His face paled. "You," he stammered, pointing at the pump jack, then at me. "That's Lopez's—" His voice trailed off as he swallowed hard. Depart, he stammered. "You're that deputy. He was my friend." His words tumbled out in a rush. "He came here, said something was wrong, sounded scared out of his mind. Then he left here one night and never came back. They told me he quit, that he moved, but he never did." His gaze shifted to the cracked cement beneath his boots. "He came here again 2 nights later, told me he needed to know if it was still happening. I told him everything was fine. He looked at us, tears glistening. I should have stopped him." I reached out to place a hand on his shoulder. "We're here to—" The man cut me off, pointing toward the darkness beyond the trees. "You don't want to stay. He's still out there." A low rumble followed, like machinery grinding under load. The pump jack arm trembled slightly, as though readying for another swing. The man clutched the door handle and leaned closer. "He told me once that the thing you're chasing never wants to be found. It just wants to move." He closed the window abruptly and kicked the truck into gear, spinning dust behind him as he tore away on the dirt road. We emerged from behind the rig, flashlights sweeping the trees. The man's headlights vanished around the bend. The lieutenant exhaled, lowering his weapon. "He didn't just leave," I said quietly. He was terrified. I looked at the pump jack, its metal bones gleaming in the light of our torches. The arm was still, but I could almost hear its gears grinding in anticipation, as though waiting for someone else to step up. A cold gust of wind rattled the pump's frame, carrying a whisper that drifted over the clearing. "Keep moving." My partner and I exchanged a glance heavy with understanding. We had the fabric, the tracks, the witness. We had analog records too, handwritten entries, our own physical proof. But the thing we chased refused to stand still. It beckoned us farther, deeper into the desert's quiet, where the next clue would lie beneath the ruins of a feeder pipeline or in the shattered radio log of a silent truck stop. I closed my recorder, my hand unsteady as I rewound the tape by hand so no one could see the counter advance. "Let's get back," I said, voice low. "We need to compare notes and plan our next move." The lieutenant nodded, eyes fixed on the trees. "And we need to do it fast," he said, "because every hour that passes it shifts again." I slid the witness fabric into my journal, securing it between pages. We turned toward the cruiser, but as we did, I caught something out of the corner of my eye. A flicker of movement at the edge of the beam, a silhouette vanishing behind a mesquite trunk. My breath caught. I swung the flashlight toward the spot. Nothing there but dust motes dancing in the light. I exhaled, heart pounding, and took a step forward. The lieutenant called softly, "You okay?" I looked at him, then back down the path we'd just walked. It lay empty, silent, unmarked, already starting to erase itself. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of the desert around me, the pull of every lost deputy, every erased call. Then I opened them again and lifted my chin. "Let's move," I said, voice steady. He nodded. "Keep moving," he echoed, stepping onto the crushed gravel. And together we headed back toward our cruisers, deeper into the hunt, knowing that turning back was no longer an option, and that the only way to survive this was to follow it all the way, wherever all the way might end. I eased out of the mesquite and onto the hard-packed road, the witness fabric tucked safely in my journal, the boot prints in my recorder, the lieutenant's cruiser trailing just behind. Dawn's pale light was giving way to full sun, and the desert's heat rose in waves off the asphalt. We drove in silence, each of us lost in the weight of what we'd uncovered and what we still didn't understand. By mid-morning, we'd covered over 200 miles, retracing ghost calls and scouring abandoned way stations. Each site yielded some trace: a dusted fingerprint on a CB microphone, a long-forgotten dispatch slip hidden under pine needles at a roadside memorial, a faded post-it stuck to an oil-field shack. We cataloged everything in our handwritten logs, careful to date and sign each entry, to leave no gap that could be wiped clean. At lunchtime, we pulled into a shaded turnout by an old ghost town gas pump, hissing with static even though it hadn't been active in years. I refilled our water bottles while the lieutenant sketched a map of our route, linking sites with lines and notes. March 15th, Koyanosa; March the 22nd, Sanderson Bridge; April 5th, Alpine Station. The map looked like a spider's web, each note a place where reality had bent, then snapped back, richer with dread than any crime scene. We drove on into the afternoon's blistering heat, following our inner compass toward a final location: a narrow stretch of Highway 349 near Gardendale, where 3 separate reports in the last month described the same figure, a man in a ranch jacket, standing at the road's edge, face turned to the sun, unmoving as traffic swept past. Each witness called it the Watcher, and each dispatch log of the call had been erased within hours. We had nothing but witness statements and our own handwritten notes to guide us. When we arrived, the highway was empty, save for tumbleweed and a few distant oil pumps. We killed the engines 12 yards from the faded white line. The lieutenant clipped our analog tape recorder to his belt, and I opened my journal to a fresh page. He handed me a small recorder of his own, battery-backed and analog, and I slipped it into my pocket. Then we stepped out into the glare. The air was still. No birds chirping, no wind rustling. Only the hum of distance, as though the earth itself was holding its breath. We walked toward the highway, boots crunching on gravel. I counted off our bearings, heading north. Northeast, 77 degrees, and recorded the time, 2:07 p.m. Exactly 1 year since Lopez's final entry. We stood shoulder to shoulder at the white line, scanning east toward Ranch Road 223. My recorder lay quiet. I clicked it on, red light blinking. We waited. 5 minutes passed. 10. Our notebooks lay open in our hands, awaiting fresh entries. Each second felt like a lifetime, the world still and hollow. Then, out of the heat mirage, I saw him. A tall figure in weathered ranch attire, hat low, face obscured in shadow. He stood by an oil barrel at the road's edge, as if waiting for something. My breath caught. I held up my hand to signal the lieutenant, then pointed. He heard me. He raised his handheld radio, analog only, and spoke. "If you can hear me, please step away from the highway." His voice echoed, tinny in the heat. The figure didn't move. He turned his head slightly as though listening, then tilted it back, gazing down the road at us with an intensity that made my spine tingle. I took a step forward, pen raised over my journal. The figure raised his hand in return, a slow, deliberate wave. My heart hammered. I answered, "We're not here to harm you, we just want to understand." The figure's hand dropped. He took a single step back, folding into the haze. The lieutenant clicked his radio off, adrenaline flashing in his eyes. We exchanged a quick glance. Then I spoke, my voice steady despite my pulse. "Can you tell us your name?" For a moment there was only silence, so thick it pressed my ears inward. Then the figure placed his hand on the brim of his hat, lifting it slightly. A breeze stirred the edge of his jacket, and I saw, pinned above the pocket, the Texas Star badge. Polished, gleaming, still bearing Lopez's initials. My throat went dry. The figure lowered his hat, tucking it back into place. He didn't speak, he just looked at us, and I felt every wound of grief and fear in that unblinking gaze. He turned and walked slowly into the scrub, the hot wind dragging dust from his boots. I held out my recorder, but there was nothing to capture. No static, no breath, no echo of his footsteps. Only the desert's sun-blistered silence. The lieutenant touched my arm. "We got what we needed," he said softly. "Proof he's real." I watched the figure vanish between two dunes, seeing that badge glint once more before the heat shimmer swallowed him whole. We stood at the road's edge, pens poised over empty pages. The recorder in my pocket felt weightless. I exhaled hard, the heat pressing in, the horizon unbroken. Finally, I wrote one last entry. April 27th, 2025, 2:15 p.m. The watcher revealed himself, badge and all. He answered without speaking. He is one of us, and yet he is beyond our records. We saw him, but we cannot hold him. I closed the journal and snapped it shut. The lieutenant's cruiser was idling behind us, door open, engine hot. We climbed inside without another word, our boots leaving fresh prints on the gravel that would be gone by sundown. As we turned onto the highway, I reached into my pocket and rubbed the recorder's casing. No buttons lit up, the tape had folded. The lion's share of our evidence existed only in ink, and even ink can be burned away. We merged into traffic, the sun bleeding gold across the highway. A CB radio crackled to life in the next cab, static first, then a familiar whisper under the hiss. "Keep moving." I watched the rearview mirror, searching for the watcher's silhouette. The road stretched behind us, empty and merciless. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and listened to the engine's steady drone. Somewhere out there he would be waiting again. Unrecorded, unreported, untouchable. And the only way to chase him was to keep moving. I climbed into the driver's seat at exactly 1:02 a.m. The station clock's red digits glowing through my windshield like a warning. The cab smelled of stale coffee and old sweat, remnants of too many nights spent chasing headlights on two-lane roads. I flicked on the overhead light long enough to check my notes from dispatch. A routine shift responding to noise complaints and lone headlights rolling past farmhouses. Nothing that should scare a man with 15 years on the streets. Yet I felt tight in the chest, like I was forgetting something important. The Crown Vic rumbled alive under my hands. I punched the siren switch once, no call tonight, and eased out onto FM 1023. The night was clear, the air thick with dust stirred up by heat still clinging to the asphalt. Crickets chirped through the open window, and somewhere a chain-link fence squealed in the breeze. I clicked on the CB mic, half expecting that hiss of static, only the usual nothing. I leaned back, testing the rig, the familiar thrum of the engine a small comfort. 20 minutes later, I passed the last cluster of streetlights in Beeville. The road stretched empty ahead, bordered by mesquite and scrub oak. I slowed, scanning for movement. This wasn't patrol by the book. This was drifting, letting the night come find me. My radio spat a brief dispatch. Unit 3, check in. I said 3 here without taking my eyes off the road. The reply was almost too quiet. Watch your 6. Stormfront coming. No channel change, no weather update, just those words hanging in the static. My knuckles whitened on the wheel. Stormfront. The forecast had said only a trace of rain, but storms in Texas don't always show up on radar. They sneak in on the wind. I flicked the wipers and tapped the switch. Nothing. I let the Vic roll to 30 miles per hour, headlights slicing through an empty horizon. At 1:37 a.m., the CB crackled again. Unit 3, do you copy? My pulse kicked up. Copy, I said. Go ahead. No response, just a faint scrape of voice. Garbled, wavering, I keyed the mic. Dispatch, come in. Silence. A half-mile ahead, the road curved around a low hill. I eased into that turn and caught the reflection of movement in my mirror. A lone tail light, dead center, no headlights of its own. No turn signals, no brake. Just that red dot fading in and out behind me. Odd for a car to travel without illumination. You'd get a ticket for that at any other hour. I shot a glance at my speedometer, 38 miles per hour, and tapped brakes to slow. The tail light held at the same distance. I flipped on my spotlight, found nothing but desert brush. I flicked it off, drove on. The light vanished. My stomach turned cold. I reached down to my holster, felt the weight of the .45. I didn't draw it. I didn't need to. I kept my knee against the door, ready for the passenger side to swing open. The road leveled. I saw that the tail light was gone. No sign of tires, no gravel kicked up on the shoulder. I checked the rearview mirror again. Blank desert staring back at me under my headlights. My breath hitched. I turned off the spotlight again, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. I passed an old water tower at the edge of town. Half a dozen water tanks rusted into the earth. Their shadows looked like silhouettes of people. I didn't slow. Those towers always looked menacing, even in daylight. At 2:05 a.m., dispatch pinged once more. Unit 3, are you there? I tapped back. Still here. And then I heard breathing, soft, deliberate, right through the speaker. I froze. The heavy inhale echoed like someone standing just behind my shoulder. I shut off the CB, heart slamming. I pressed the window switch, cracked it open. The wind rushed in, dust stinging my face. I looked around. Nothing out there but a wide-open horizon. I flipped the mic back on, voice low. Dispatch, hello? Nothing. I clicked it off, leaned back and tried to breathe steady. My eyes kept flicking to the passenger door. My mind reached for logic. Electrical anomaly, crossed wires, someone testing my nerve. But in all the years I'd driven these roads, I'd never once heard breathing that wasn't my own. I came up on the old railroad tracks that cross Highway 44. The warning lights were out, no crossing gates, no bells. Boxes of torn pallets lay strewn on the embankment. I slowed to 20, listening. That breathing returned, fainter, like someone digging in the earth. I grabbed the spotlight and flicked it on, sweeping across the tracks. No one. No footprints between the rails. Just darkness and pallets. I switched the light off and hit the gas. The Vic lurched forward. As I cleared the crossing, my dashboard camera blinked. Lens light indicator briefly illuminated and died. I grabbed the knob, fiddled with the lens cover, nothing wrong. The camera never cut out before. I made a mental note. Have it check that in the morning. The road straightened again, leading me to a cluster of trailer homes nearly half a mile off the highway. I'd seen these places on radar. Patchwork shacks with cars piled up on cinder blocks. Dispatch had received a call 10 minutes earlier. Someone's knocking at my door, can't see who, keeps asking for help. The caller hung up before giving an address. At 2:27 a.m., I eased down the dirt lane. My headlights cut across a faded mailbox, no name, parked 20 yards from the nearest trailer. The tires sank slightly in the red clay. I killed the engine, flicked my flashlight on, and stepped out. Dry ground crackled under my boots. Crickets paused. I lifted the radio to my ear, silent now. I tapped the mic. Unit 3, on scene. Send me the address. No answer. I approached the trailer, hand resting on the butt of my pistol. The door sat half open, swaying on its hinges. Fear and anger warred in me. Someone dared to call for help and not wait? I clicked the flashlight beam into the entryway. Nothing but a threadbare couch and an overturned coffee table. I flipped on the porch light with the switch by the door frame. Dead bulb. I stepped in. Inside, the air was stale and warm. I swept the beam across the kitchen, a plate of half-eaten biscuits, a coffee pot long cold. The wall clock showed 9:14 p.m. I frowned. No power outage. Someone had to have walked in and switched it back. I moved into the living room. That's when I saw them. 3 handwritten notes taped to the wall above the couch. They read the same message, each in a different hand. Don't believe him, he's not alone. He's always listening. My pulse pounded so hard I thought they'd hear it. I stared at those notes, trying to find the caller's voice. The hairs at the back of my neck prickled. I glanced at the doorway, empty. Then the beam landed on fresh footprints in the dusty carpet, heading toward the bathroom. My hand tightened on my flashlight. I whispered, "Who's here?" No answer. I stepped forward, followed the footprints. The bathroom door was shut. I eased the handle, unlocked, and pushed it open. Inside, the light snapped on. No switch. The mirror reflected my own face, pale and tight. And there, written in lipstick on the glass, "I'm right beside you." I spun around, nothing. My throat went dry. I retreated, slammed the trailer door, and sprinted back to the cruiser. I fumbled the keys, dropped my radio. Boots scrambled on the clay as I vaulted in, slamming the door. I didn't wait for the engine to turn over. I gunned it. Tires spinning, red clay spraying. As I cleared the lane, the trailer's porch light clicked off behind me. I punched the mic. "Dispatch, get units here." Static, only static. I swerved onto the highway, eyes flicking to the rearview mirror. No headlights, no trailers, no notes taped to glass. Just dust settling where someone, something, had stood too close behind me. And I realized I'd been listening all along. Only now I wasn't sure what I'd heard. I eased the Vic back onto FM 1023, the engine's hum barely masking the thud of my heart. Headlights swept across the scrub brush as I sped north, leaving that empty trailer park and whatever had lurked there behind. My eyes burned from the effort of pushing away memories, the words on that mirror, the scrape of footsteps and dust. I reached for the radio once more, thumb hovering over the mic button. I knew better than to speak into that static, but I did anyway. "Dispatch, this is Unit 3. Send me backup. Now." Nothing but crackle. I killed the CB, slammed my hand on the dash, and forced the Vic into a U-turn. I had to see, had to be sure it wasn't chasing me. But as I turned, mirrors reflected only empty road and dark sky. No trailer lights, no figures at the window. My breath came in short bursts. I reminded myself, no ghosts, no monsters, just someone playing games on midnight calls. I could handle that. I had seen worse. I flipped on my dome light, rummaged in the console for a fresh notebook and pen. I had to document everything before I forgot details. As I wrote, the Vic's headlights flickered, once, twice, then steadied. A loose bulb wiring, I thought. You're tired, you think? I tore out the page, tucked it in my jacket. The station would want a full report. I didn't want to talk about lips pressed to mirrors or breath in an empty rig. I started the engine and pointed north toward Childress, another 40 miles. The storm front was supposed to arrive there by 3 a.m. I wanted to be ahead of it. At least, that made sense. The road narrowed as I climbed a gentle ridge. I switched off interior lights, letting night reclaim me. Miles passed. My focus slipped between road and wing mirrors. I tried to meet my own gaze in that reflective glass. Hardened, tired, questioning. A patrol officer should know there's always a logical answer, but every logical thought kept unraveling. At 2:53 a.m., I crested the ridge and saw the sign, "Welcome to Childress County. Drive safely." Its letters were chipped, half lit by cracked LEDs. I passed under and felt that hollow tug in my chest, a loop of dread. Dispatch hit the airwaves. Unit 3, Childress County. We've got a 911 hang-up from FM 1023. Caller said, "I'm trapped." Then line went dead. Location read 7.8 miles north of Van Horn. My jaw clenched. Van Horn was over 2 hours behind me. This call was routed through another dispatcher, then back again. No wonder it showed. That weird location. But I'm trapped? Couldn't be the woman from the trailer. Her call came from County Line Road, off FM 1023 miles south. I pressed the mic. Dispatch got that. I'm south of Childress, heading back to... Static swallowed my words. Again. I flicked off the CB and hit the brakes. My tires screeched against pavement. Ahead, a dim glow hovered low over the highway. I killed the engine. The glow didn't flicker or move, just hung there, low, like a stalled rig's clearance lights. I watched, breath misting against the windshield. No cab shape, just light, glowing where nothing should be. I reached slowly for my flashlight, peeled open my door, and stepped onto the asphalt. Heat rose in waves from the blacktop. I clicked the beam at the glow. Nothing but air. The light vanished as soon as I swept past where it had hovered. I swallowed, my pulse hammered in my throat. Logic said head back to the station, get daylight and reinforcements. But something nagged me. What if someone really was stranded? Lost? Afraid? I climbed back in, locked the doors, and backed up 10 feet. Then I floored it. The Vic lunged forward, and as I passed where the glow had been, my spotlight caught movement. 2 figures crouched by the guardrail. They wore coveralls, hard hats with lamps. Road crew? But the highway wasn't under construction. I jammed on brakes again. They scrambled up and ran into the mesquite, lamps swinging wildly. I grabbed the mic. Dispatch, send. The channel burst with broken words. Unit 3, are you... I cut the mic. Sirens droned in the distance. A second patrol car coming fast. I killed the engine, left it running to keep the lights on, and stepped out with gun drawn. My boots cracked on gravel. The other cruiser's red and blue strobes spun, painting the night in frantic colors. Deputy Marshal tumbled from the passenger side, flashlight bobbing in one hand, radio in the other. "Jesus Christ, man, you okay?" His voice was rough with adrenaline. I called out to him. They were here. 2 of them. I pointed toward the brush. He trained his beam on the mesquite. No one there. I sighed, tried to steady my voice. They ran off. He looked at me, eyes narrow. "You've been all over the map, Garza. Come on, let's check your rig." He gestured to the Vic. Inside, the runner lamp figures had scuffed clay on the bumper. He shone light on the paint, smears, like tire tracks in mud that had dried. He frowned. "This road's been dry for weeks." I nodded, voice tight. "I know." We walked back to the cruiser. He asked, "What happened at that trailer place?" My throat tightened. I hesitated. He pressed on. "Was someone in there?" I looked down. I found 3 notes, bathroom mirror, said I was right beside them. I lifted my gaze. The door was open, no power, no footprints except my own, and then it shut behind me. He studied me like I was spinning a yarn. Then he clapped me on the shoulder. "Let's log it as a prank call, and that CB glitch, maybe the new channel patch is acting up." His tone was firm, reassuring, like shaking off a late-night hallucination. I wanted to believe him. We climbed in. He took the passenger seat. I slid behind the wheel. The cruiser's engines purred. We eased north on FM 1023. The storm front finally hit. Gusts rattling the windscreen, dust whipping across my headlights. The CB crackled as static turned to squall warnings. Against the roar of the wind, I almost heard that breath again, steady, close. The kind that isn't your own. I shut off the CB and drove straight through the storm, headlights and wipers fighting for clarity. Marshall sat silent beside me, eyes forward. I clenched the wheel with both hands, knuckles white, and prayed morning would come before I heard that breathing again. I eased the Vic through the rain-slicked road, Marshall's cruiser tailing close behind. The wipers thudded in my rhythm as I drove us toward the county line, where the storm was supposed to break. My eyes darted between the fleeting glow of his strobes in the rearview mirror and the dim horizon ahead. I could still taste the copper tang of adrenaline in my mouth. Every knock of thunder seemed to echo the footsteps I'd chased. We rolled past the old cotton gin at 3:12 a.m., its skeletal frame half illuminated by lightning. I slowed, took my foot off the brake, and let the Vic drift. The engine's hum fell away. Only the rain pelted the hood. Marshall tapped my shoulder. "You seeing this?" He pointed past the metal beams. Through the sheets of rain, I thought I saw a shape standing by the fence line. A tall silhouette under no light. I blinked. The shape vanished. "Probably the wind," I said, but my voice was hollow. He cracked the window a few inches. The gusts and rain blew in, and over the roar I thought I heard that slow breathing again, steady, wet, deliberate. I slammed the window closed. "Hell of a storm tonight," I muttered. Ahead, the road crested another ridge. As we cleared it, the rain's intensity lessened. I caught the flicker of headlights up ahead, another set of patrol lights moving east. I toggled my radio. "Unit 3 to all units, status check." The static replied with nothing but misaligned voices. I made a mental note. The comms network was glitching, feeding us static warnings and hang-ups. At 3:25 a.m., I reached the County Line Road exit. I pulled off the highway, lights still on, rain thinning to a hush. Marshall followed and killed his cruiser's engine. I grabbed my torch and stepped out. The night air was thick with humidity and distant thunder. I scanned the horizon. Flat farmland. Wire fences extending toward nowhere. "Where to now?" Marshall asked, voice low. I lifted one hand, pointing east. "There's an old road crew camp, abandoned since '89. Cinder block barracks, mess hall's roof caved in. Remember when we ran night school together?" He nodded. "I figure someone called 911 from out there. Could be kids messing around, or something else." We crossed the muddy ground toward the first building. My boots sank an inch in red clay. We passed broken concrete foundations and rusted barrels. Lightning forked the sky, revealing peeling paint on the barracks. I pressed my torch to the door. It swung in with a creak. We stepped inside. The beam cut through shadows. Wooden tables turned over. Graffiti scrawled on walls. Names, dates, obscene jokes. The air smelled of mildew and rot. Marshall clicked on his light and swept it across the rafters. I studied the ground and saw footprints. Bare feet, small, heading deeper into the mess hall doorway. I froze, listening. The faint drip of water from the roof joined that breathing sound, as though someone was exhaling into the dark. I whispered. "You hearing that?" He nodded, thumb on his mic. "We should call this in." I shook my head. Number, not yet. We advanced slowly into the mess hall. Tables and chairs lay in piles. I stepped into a puddle. Murky water splashed against my boot. The beam caught something on the floor, a soda can crushed flat, the brand long gone. Then, further on, I saw a single set of muddy footprints, an adult's leading toward the kitchen door. Lightning flared outside, and in that instant I saw movement past the doorway, a figure darting into the pantry. I lunged forward, torch stabbing the dark, but there was nothing there. The pantry door hung ajar. Inside, torn sacks of flour spilled onto the floor like snow. I heard that breath again, soft, close, and unmistakably human. My pulse drummed in my ears. I signaled Marshall off to the right flank. He slipped behind a broken counter, torch beam sweeping left. I crouched and edged toward the pantry. My hand brushed the doorknob. I cracked it wider. The beam found nothing but flour and an overturned shelf of canned goods. Then I noticed footprints in the flour, bare toes sinking deep. They trailed to the back wall where someone had scrawled with a finger, "I see you." I exhaled, voice tight. Jesus. I snapped photos with my phone. Low battery, but enough. Marshall joined me, peered at the finger strokes. "Looks fresh," he said. I paced the breadcrumbs of footprints, about 30 paces, leading back into the mess hall, then out through a side door. I followed Marshall outside. The rain had stopped, leaving only the distant rumble of thunder and the steady drip of water from metal eaves. We stood in the open yard as lightning traced the horizon. "Let's get back to the rigs," I said. "We'll need backup and code enforcement. This place is too big to clear ourselves." He nodded, checking his phone for a signal. 0 bars. He shook his head. "Great." I glanced around. No sign of the figure, no flicker of movement. Just the empty camp, silent but for the drip and thunder. My mind churned. Who had called from here? Who had left those notes and footprints? And why the calls erased from dispatch? What if, God help me, something was out here that didn't want me to tell? I squared my shoulders. "We'll start logging evidence. Then we'll run a grid search. Squad cars, dogs, daylight if we have to." He looked at me, steady, calm. I envied him. I felt ragged. But in that moment I found a piece of my old resolve. We climbed back into our cruisers. As I turned the key, my dash cam flickered again. Lens light blinking twice, then winking out. I exhaled a sharp laugh. This damn thing. I tapped the dash. Marshall rolled his eyes. I pulled back onto the highway, heading south toward Van Horn. The dark mass of the camp receded behind us. My wipers cleared the windshield. My lights cut a path through open road. Behind me, Marshall followed in silent convoy. But in the mirror, I glanced once more, just as a low fog began to drift across the tarmac, hugging the ground in ghostly tendrils. I rubbed my eyes. When I looked again, the fog was gone, but the lingering dread remained. I kept my eyes glued to the dark horizon as we rolled back onto the highway, both cruisers moving in, near silence. Marshall hung back a little, giving me the lead, but I didn't feel any relief in having company. If anything, it reminded me that someone else was witnessing this with me, and would remember it. Memories like these stick in the gut. We drove until 4:01 a.m., passing the dead glow of an LED sign for a defunct motel. Its letters spelled vacancy, though no vacancy existed in the craving dread that settled over me. Ahead, I spotted a turnoff for Lone Star Road, a gravel ribbon nobody used except locals escaping speed traps. I flicked my left signal and peeled off the asphalt. kicking up dust that trailed for miles behind us. Marshall followed. The road wound into scrubland, flat and unbroken, the occasional mesquite clump lit by my headlights. The storm had passed, but dew settled on the road, making it slick and mirrored. I felt my pulse rat-a-tat against the steering wheel. We were deep in territory where cell service died and the sky spread out like a watchful eye. At 4:07 a.m., my spotlight caught the silhouette of an old farmhouse on the horizon, a squat one-story frame, windows dark, paint peeled to bare wood. I hesitated. Nobody lived there. Local lore said the last family left in '95, leaving everything behind. I glanced at Marshall. He raised an eyebrow but stayed quiet. We cruised to a stop 50 yards out. My engine idled low. "This place," I said under my breath. "I drove past here once on a stakeout, never saw a soul, but heard something." My voice cracked. He clicked on his light and swept the ground. "Tracks?" he asked. I killed my engine and grabbed my rifle. "Check the porch." My boots crunched toward the house. I stopped at the corner of the porch, flashlight carving a slice through the air. The wood groaned under my weight. No one had fixed these boards in decades. I glanced back to make sure Marshall stood ready in my 6. The front door was ajar. I clicked on my radio. "Marshall, I'm checking the house." He replied, "Copy that." I eased the door fully open. Inside, the air was cold, denser than the humid night. I swept my torch through the living room. Broken recliner, dusty curtains, a cracked mirror over the mantel. I stepped in, boots stirring dust motes that hung like ghosts in the beam. I crossed to the mirror. Nothing scrawled here, just spider webs. Through the archway, I saw the hallway. 3 doors lined it. The last led to the kitchen. I motioned to Marshall, then crept down the hall. He followed, rifle ready. We moved in tandem, 3 steps at a time, until I reached the first door. It was a bedroom, faded floral wallpaper, mattress stripped of sheets, spring coils poking through. I heard a faint click behind me. I spun. Marshall hovered at the doorway, flashlight trained on the floor. He pointed. I crouched, scratches on the linoleum, like nails raking across. Fresh. My gut seized. I looked at him, he nodded. We backed into the hall. The second door opened onto another room. This one, a child's faded cartoon wallpaper peeling. A single stuffed bear sat on a shelf. I flicked on my beam, its eyes were backlit, but then I realized a small mirror behind it caught the light. I leaned in. Something written in dust on the shelf's edge. "He knows." My breath caught. I didn't laugh it off this time. We moved to the last door. It opened to the kitchen. Rusted stove, sink with faucet dripping water into a yellowed basin. On the counter lay 3 empty mason jars, their lids snapped tightly. I crossed and picked one up. It weighed nothing. I twisted the lid, the jar popped. Inside, a scrap of paper. "You should have left." I read it twice, voice trembling. Marshall's beam swept the ceiling. "Are you recording this?" he asked, phone pointed. No signal, but it could store video. I nodded, voice tight. I filmed the jars, the note, then the scratches on the floor. Behind us, the front door creaked shut. I spun, light darting. Nothing. I backed toward Marshall, heart thudding. "Let's go," I said. He exhaled, rifle lowering. As we turned, the cupboard door beside the stove swung open on its own. My spine stiffened. The cupboard was empty, but for a handful of silverware strewn at odd angles. One spoon lay balanced upright on the counter, handle flared, bowl pointing skyward. I stared, mouth dry. I stepped forward and swept it into my hand. Cold metal. My flashlight picked out a small smudge on the handle, like a fingerprint. Someone had been here. Not 1995, but recently. I clipped the spoon into an evidence bag and backed into the hall. Marshall followed, flashlight dancing in front of him. We passed the child's room. The bear sat where we left it. I saw its head tilted slightly, facing the hallway now. I swear it moved when our beams passed over it. We reached the living room. The front door stood closed. I grabbed the knob, locked. My head spun. I tried again, locked. I slammed my fist. Nothing. Panic's edge sharpened. I reached into my jacket. For keys, forgotten on the cruiser. I turned back and found the mirror above the mantel now cracked, a deep fracture spidering from one edge. I must have missed it a moment before. I silenced my racing thoughts and stepped closer. No writing, just the crack. But beneath, a smear, faint, like someone pressed their fingers to it. I touched it, fingertips brushing the glass. It was sticky, cold. A low thump came from upstairs. No stairs. This house was one story. My heart hammered. I shook Marshall. "Did you hear that?" His torch beam swung high onto the ceiling. Nothing. Another thump, then a scrape. Overhead, dust fell from the ceiling joists. Dry plaster crumbled. I swallowed hard, voice gruff. "It's above us." He pointed to a gap where ceiling boards met the wall. Something shifted, a shape sliding away in the space above. Breath caught in my chest. I kicked at the wall. It gave, revealing a crawl space. The gap widened as debris tumbled. A heavy exhale rolled out, followed by a faint whisper. "I'm here." Marshall aimed his beam up into the darkness. I climbed onto the counter, lifted the panel, and peered in. Nothing but rotted wood and darkness. But I felt breath, warm, close, brushing my ear. I nearly jumped out of my skin. I flattened onto the counter and reached in, fingers closing on cold metal. Another utensil, a knife. I yanked it free. Its blade glinted. I pressed it against the wood, thick enough that it didn't splinter. I felt the weight of something beyond the wall, shifting. I stabbed once. Plastic sheath scraped, but nothing followed. I looked at Marshall, breathing heavy. He mouthed, "Let's get out." I nodded, blood pounding. I lowered the panel and shoved it back into place. It closed with a dull suck, as if pulling breath into the wall. The thumping stopped. We backed away. I turned left, but the back door stood open now, although we'd never touched it. A faint glow spilled in, a single lantern hanging by its chain from the roof eave outside. The glow pulsed, in time with my heart. I looked at Marshall. He pointed his light outside. I followed. No porch, just empty ground where our cruisers had been parked. The lantern floated in midair, swaying gently. No rope, no branch. I felt the breath again, then a whisper so close I felt it on my cheek. "Don't go yet." I bolted forward, yanking the front door open with both hands, and ran out into the chill night. I heard Marshall behind me, scrambling. Then the next instant, his voice, "Jesus Christ, Garza!" We dove toward the cruisers that weren't there. Panic surged as empty asphalt glared under a flickering lantern glow. We turned, looked back at the house. The lantern winked off. Darkness roared back. I yanked my radio. "Dispatch! We need units now!" The static rasped, but no answer. I slammed my hand against the dashboard. My breath bellowed, ragged. Then headlights split the darkness. Marshall's cruiser and two more racing toward us. Sirens off, lights flickering. We ran toward them, panting, then dove inside the nearest. I slammed the door, locked it, and watched the house through rain-blurred windshield. When they turned their strobes on, the farmhouse's windows lit one by one. Dim, yellow rectangles flickering behind curtained panes. I leaned forward, pressing my forehead against the glass. No doors moved, no porch signs. Then they all went dark at once. I sat back, voice hollow. There were people up there. Marshall's hand found mine on the console. We're safe now. But as lightning forked across the sky, I saw dozens of faces pressed against those windows, silent, pale, watching us drive away. We didn't speak as we headed south, the storm's last rumbles fading behind. The farmhouse shrank in my mirror, swallowed by scrub and night. I kept glancing back, waiting for those lights to reappear. But more than that, I wondered what we'd unleashed by prying into empty walls. I drove through the first pale light of dawn, the horizon bleeding silver as I pressed south on FM 1023. My eyes felt gritty, weighted by exhaustion and something heavier. An unease coiled in my gut that no amount of speed could shake loose. Marshall rode shotgun, silent except for the occasional sigh as he rubbed his temples. We both knew why. We'd walked into that farmhouse in Lone Star territory believing it abandoned, and instead found invitations to something alive in the walls. I'd felt breath against my neck in empty rooms, heard whispers in crawl spaces, and watched a lantern float without a rope. We'd escaped by sheer luck, and neither of us wanted to admit how close we'd come to something we couldn't fight or explain away. At 5:14 a.m., I passed the sign for Van Horn again. We'd looped hours ago, returning nearly to the start of my shift. The rain had washed clean the clay tracks on the Vic's bumper, but not the memory of them. I slowed at an intersection, glanced at my rearview mirror. Marshall's tired eyes blinked back at me, and I realized I'd neglected to call it in. No backup, no crime scene tape, just our word against a silent house that refused to stay empty. I turned right onto Jeffries Road, thinking maybe I could catch dispatch before the sun fully rose. The radio crackled with the county morning report. Road closures, carnival in town next weekend, nothing about 911 hang-ups or phantom lanterns. I keyed the mic. Dispatch, this is Unit 3. I need to file. Static swallowed my words. I flipped the switch off and on. Nothing. Comm lines still dead. I sank back, hands trembling on the wheel. We drove on in silence, both of us acutely aware of how little communication meant out here. Phone towers were few and far between. The scrubland ate signals whole. I thought about how that farmhouse's windows had lit up behind us, one by one, faces peering out at two uniformed officers fleeing into the night. I couldn't tell if they were children, adults, or specters. I didn't want to know. After what felt like miles, I found an open line on the CB, Channel 7. I dropped the mic and pressed the PTT. Unit 3 to all units. Anyone copy? A beat, then a fragmented response. Heavy fog, cameras out. I'm static again. I let go of the mic and closed my eyes for a moment. The Vic rumbled beneath me. My throat was raw from shouting into dead air earlier. I scanned the horizon. A bare ridge running parallel to the road marked the old railway grade, abandoned decades ago. A little further on, I spotted a rusted sign, "Beware of falling rock." No cliffs for miles, just mayonnaise-colored limestone spires worn by wind. I eased the accelerator. The highway stretched out, smooth ribbon cutting through a landscape that felt ancient and indifferent. At 5:27 a.m., I saw a single headlight illuminated on the shoulder, half buried by sand. It belonged to a late-model sedan, door ajar, engine off. I slid to a stop 20 feet away, heart thudding. Marshall leaned forward. "What now?" he whispered. I grabbed the torch. We approached cautiously. The sedan's interior light was on, the driver's seat empty. No footprints in the soft shoulder, just my own from when I stepped out. I scanned inside, a backpack on the passenger seat, zipper open, clothes spilling out. I flicked the interior lamp off, stepped back. Something about this felt like a phone call left off the hook. I tapped the car's horn twice. Nothing. Then, through the cracked window, I heard low breathing. I drew my weapon, gloved hand steady on the slide. I pressed my torch beam through the window. No one. The front door stood open into the sand. I edged closer, pressed my ear to the glass. The breathing continued, soft and wet. I radioed in. "Dispatch, be advised. I've got an unoccupied vehicle on the shoulder southbound. No plates, possible occupant inside." No reply. My pulse pounded as I circled to the driver's side. I yanked the door open. The breath snapped off like a switch, leaving only the hum of my own blood in my ears. The seatbelt hung loose. I reached inside, tugged the backpack free. It was heavy, waterlogged from the rain. I shrugged it off to the side and popped the trunk. Empty, except for a small cooler. I lifted it. Inside lay a single pair of cracked aviator sunglasses, lenses smeared with salt and something darker. I pressed the sunglasses to my face, then dropped them, retching silently. I closed the trunk and backed away. I told Marshall, "We should tow this in as evidence." He nodded, pulling out his cell phone, 2 bars and climbing. He keyed the number to the station. His face shifted as he spoke. Surprise, confusion, then tension. He covered the phone and whispered, "They're saying there's no report of any missing person. Nobody called it in." I kicked at the sand. "Then who owns this car?" I stifled a laugh that tasted bitter. We'd answered calls about people trapped, heard voices on private channels, found notes urging us not to believe what we saw. And now this. A phantom car on the shoulder, loaded with personal effects we couldn't trace. Marshall hung up his phone. "They want us to leave it. No tags, no owner, no report." I shook my head, voice low. "You can't just leave behind possible evidence." He sighed. "They'll send a wrecker unit later. Let's get back to patrol." I backed into the Vic, slammed my door. It occurred to me that dispatch had likely disconnected us on purpose. Code freeze, higher-ups covering this up. We'd circled again, but the net was closing. As we resumed northbound, I realized the fog ahead on the road had thickened. Just on the horizon, it clung to the asphalt like ghost smoke. My headlights sliced through only a few feet. I slowed to a crawl. Marshall edged forward, engine low. Between us, the world faded into white mist. No road, no horizon, no fields. Just us and this wall of fog. At 5:41 a.m., we reached the edge and peered in. The fog behaved like water, rolling in waves across the asphalt. I killed the engine. The silence was total. No wipers, no tires on pavement, no echo of our breath. I turned to Marshall. "We stay here?" He shook his head, almost imperceptibly. Then he positioned his high beams and flicked them on. I did the same. The fog glimmered in our beams, icy silver. We waited. Then a shape emerged. Tall, slender, motionless in the mist. No reflective gear, no vehicle. It stood in the middle of the road, arms at its sides. As our lights met it, its features resolved. A man in a soaking blue shirt, face turned toward us. His eyes glowed faintly in the beam. He rubbed at his cheeks, as if surprised by the mist. He took a step forward, then another. His gait was slow, deliberate. I swallowed. "Sir?" I called through the closed window. No response, just that steady breathing resonating through the fog. Another step. Then the fog shifted, and I saw dozens more shapes, figures, standing behind him, half hidden in the vapor, all facing us, silent as statues. My arm trembled on the wheel. I shot Marshall a look. He was frozen, rifle gun light dancing on the empty fog. The shapes flickered. Some turned away, others glided closer. They moved without footprint, strange as drifting smoke. I realized I didn't know how to call backup. The fog had swallowed my radio signal hours ago. The phones were useless. We were trapped in a corridor of white, surrounded by men, women, no, shapes that wore human skins but moved like wraiths. I thought of my family asleep at home, safe in bed, and wondered if I'd ever see them again. Then the lead figure raised his hand, and a voice cracked through the fog, distant but identifiable. My voice echoing back to me, calm, measured, reporting a routine patrol and a structure that had no business being empty. And I understood this was no prank. This was the night breathing back my own words, skeletons answering to calls no one made. I swallowed, pressed the Vic's horn once, twice, and the fog swallowed the sound. The shapes stiffened, unmoving. No headlights cut past their forms. I glanced at Marshall. He nodded once, determined. I flicked the siren on. Its wail split the mist, sending ripples through the huddle of figures. They did not flinch. I jammed the Vic into drive and floored it straight at the nearest shape. Tires spat gravel. I felt them brush the bumper, like a cloth brushing across metal, then nothing. I emerged on the other side of the fog bank onto clear road, sun's first rays breaking through clouds. Marshall raised the siren and lights as other cruisers emerged behind us, responding at last. I slowed, heart hammering, as the mist receded. There was no sedan, no farmhouse, no camp, only highway and scrub. The backup cars pulled up, flashing around us. Dispatch crackled to life with dozens of calls, all reports of missing vehicles, abandoned phones, vanished road crews from hours ago. I climbed out of the Vic, hands shaking. I turned back toward the fog's edge, but it had already lifted. Only a faint haze lingered in the ditch. I stared at it, dread rooting me to the spot, until I heard Marshall beside me. Get on the radio. I hesitated, looked back at the empty road and the rising sun. All I could think was, if we'd stayed a moment longer, I would have answered my own call. And then I heard it, soft, behind me, breathing. I spun around. The highway lay empty. I reached for the radio. It crackled once. Then silence. The air smelled of burnt rubber and dew as the morning patrol cars surrounded us. Marshall climbed out and waved off the backup units, his face drawn tight. I sat in the driver's seat, engine idling, sweat cooling on my neck. Around us, the highway rolled out like any other stretch of FM asphalt. No fog bank, no phantom sedan, no farmhouse or camp in sight. Dispatch finally crackled alive. Unit 3, confirm status. What's your location? I paused, my finger hovering over the mic. If I spoke now, I'd have to describe things that no one would believe. But I had to try. This is Unit 3, I said slowly, voice low. We're southbound on FM 1023 near mile marker 47. I've got multiple anomalies to report. Static crackled, then anomalies. I glanced at Marshall. He gave me a curt nod. I cleared my throat. We encountered a farmhouse, unoccupied on record, with signs of recent habitation, notes taped to mirrors, footprints behind walls, a floating lantern, and voices on private channels. Then a vehicle with no plates, and finally a fog bank with figures that replied to my own transmissions. They vanished when we broke through. Silence. Then, backup units are inbound. Proceed to Childress Station for debrief. I cut the mic and exhaled. Marshall leaned in. You okay? My vision swam with images, faces in windows, breath on the CB, the sound of someone calling my name from beyond the mist. I nodded. We head in. We pulled onto the highway. Other cruisers fell in line behind us. Sirens off. Lights muted. I kept scanning the roadside, expecting to see one last flicker of movement. Nothing but dawn light and scrub brush. At 6:05 a.m., we arrived at the Childress County Station. I killed the engine and sat for a moment, chest heaving. Marshall reached over and rested a hand on my shoulder. "We made it," he said. I opened the door, stepped into the cool morning air, and felt every eye in the station lobby turn toward me. The shift supervisor met me at the desk, eyebrows raised. "You two look like hell. Let's start paperwork." I followed him into the briefing room as Marshall gathered our equipment. On the table lay the evidence bag with the cracked aviators, the blood salt residue on the lenses visible through the plastic. My rifle leaned against the wall, rifling debris still clinging to the barrel. The supervisor shut the door. "Begin," he said. I exhaled and launched into the report. The barn with the CB speaker, the trailer park with the mirror notes, the camp with flower-scrawled threats, the farmhouse with its crawlspace warnings, the phantom sedan and the fog figures. I described the breath on the radio, the floating lantern, the windows lighting up behind us. I spoke in clipped sentences, the way I'd been trained, then let go and let the terror slip in. Heads tilted, pens paused. Some faces grew pale. One rookie let out a breath so loud I looked up sharply. The supervisor rubbed his temple. "This is a lot," he said. "We'll need full statements, witnesses, everything." I nodded, voice husky. "Will there be follow-up?" He hesitated. "We'll classify this under unusual events. We'll bring in OIB for paranormal investigations, just in case." He forced a smile. "You're off the hook for now." I stood, jaw tight. Outside the window, sunlight splashed the parking lot, the scrub brush beyond. I felt the pull of that fog bank still clinging to my skin. I couldn't shake the sense that I'd been invited somewhere, and I'd said yes by getting out of that Vic. Marshall joined me in the lobby. He dropped his phone and keys onto the counter. "I don't want another midnight shift," he said quietly. I looked at him, voice low. "Neither do I." We walked outside together, boots crunching gravel. The morning chill was fading, replaced by the promise of another scorcher. I rubbed my arms. "You up for coffee?" I asked. He managed a small grin. "You buy, I'll drink." As we crossed to my cruiser, I spotted the broken aviator lenses poking through the evidence bag. I thought about slipping them off my face one last time, but something stopped me. I lifted them up, put them on. The world shimmered, familiar yet altered, like I was viewing reality through a cracked lens. Marshall slid into the passenger seat. I closed the door and settled behind the wheel. For a heartbeat, the world stood still, engines off, sun bright, but the edges of my vision frayed with the echo of that final breath. I started the engine. As we pulled away, lights flashing behind, I heard Marshall whisper, "Garza, do you feel that?" I didn't answer. I only stared at the empty road ahead, because I knew, even if the world thought it was clear, if the morning map said the fog had lifted, it was still out there, waiting in the spaces between static and silence. And one day I'd have to go back. I drove us away from Childress Station in near silence, the Vic's engine a low hum under the rising sun. Marshall sat beside me, shoulders slumped, staring out the window at a world that looked peaceful and innocent. I wanted to tell him it was over, that daylight burnt off such things, but I knew better. We headed south toward Van Horn, retracing the highway that had betrayed us in the dark. Mile markers slipped by, 48, 47, 46, each a reminder of how far we'd come and what we'd left behind. My hands gripped the wheel tight enough to blanch my knuckles. In the passenger's side visor mirror, I caught my reflection. eyes red-rimmed, jaw set, a man haunted by echoes. At 7:02 a.m., we passed a cluster of wind turbines, white giants turning lazily in the morning breeze. I half expected to see something slipping between the blades, but they stood empty, their blades carving slow arcs of nothingness. They reminded me of the farmhouse windows, hollow shapes that seemed alive only when I remembered to look. Dispatch crackled with chatter about road closures for carnival traffic. Stray livestock on the frontage road, even a report of a deer strike near B County. No mention of our events. No squad cars circling back. No investigators combing the side roads. It was as if the night's terrors had been edited out of the official record. I flicked on the CB. Unit 3 to all units. Any updates on that missing sedan? Static answered. I shook my head. The sedan, the aviators, the jars of notes, the letters scrawled in flour, the living shadows in the fog. All of it vanished in daylight bureaucracy. Marshall sighed beside me. "Garza, you still planning on writing this up?" he asked quietly. The tone held doubt, exhaustion, wonder. I closed my eyes for a moment. I'd thought about typing a full report, turning every detail into dry words on paper. But I'd learned in these years that some things can't be named. They can only be remembered. I gave a curt nod. "Yeah, I'll get to it," he exhaled, look of relief flickering. "Good." We pulled off at the Van Horn exit and headed toward the station there, two tired deputies carrying evidence that screamed questions no one dared ask. As we crossed under the town's welcome sign, its paint faded, letters chipped. Dawn's golden light washed over my dashboard, illuminating the cracked aviators and the spatters of clay that would no longer come off my boots. Inside the station, I laid the evidence on the briefing table. The jars with folded notes, the spoon with the fingerprint smudge, the aviators etched by salt. Paperwork flared into existence. Chain of custody forms, incident reports, requests for metal printouts. They all bore sections titled Unexplained Phenomena or Subjective Officer Observations. I filled my name beside them. Once that was done, I headed outside, coffee in hand, hoping for a moment's peace. The sun was fully up, heat already baking the pavement. Marshall joined me, cradling a styrofoam cup. We watched traffic trickle by, semi-trucks, lone sedans, workers heading toward the fields. There was normalcy here, the world going about its daily business as if our night had never happened. I took a slow sip, the bitter warmth grounding me. I glanced at the highway behind, where shadows still clung to the shoulders, even in sunlight. I felt a shiver that the warmth couldn't chase away. Marshall nudged me. "You want to ride shotgun tomorrow?" he asked, voice rough. I met his eyes. He meant the next graveyard shift. I wanted to say no, wanted to stay home, stay safe, stay away from whispers on private channels. But some part of me knew I'd be back. The road called, the radio hissed, the fog beckoned. I set my coffee down, brow furrowing. "Yeah," I said finally. "Yeah, I will." He managed a tired grin and lifted his cup. I clinked mine against his and we drank. As we stood on the sun-warmed concrete, I heard it again. A soft exhale, like someone stepping up behind me. I turned, expecting to see Marshall or a fellow deputy or even a civilian with a question. Instead, the empty highway stretched on, the day in full swing. I swallowed. The tarmac shimmered in the heat, and I thought I saw a ripple, a mirage forming where the road met the horizon. My breath caught. For a moment, I wondered if I'd glimpsed movement, figures drifting back into the dust, faces turning to watch us go. But the air was still. Birds sang on unseen power lines. A breeze stirred the flags by the station's porch. I took another sip of coffee and felt the weight of my badge dig into my chest. This was the world I'd sworn to protect. A world that sometimes breathed back secrets it never meant to share. I pulled away from the Van Horn station just after 7:30 a.m., the heat already rising in waves off the asphalt. The rising sun cut through my cracked aviators, and I felt the familiar weight of the night pressing against the coming day. Marshall rode beside me, eyes half-lidded with exhaustion, clutching his coffee like a lifeline. We'd done our paperwork, filed our statements, though every word felt inadequate, like trying to describe an echo in the dark. As we cruised south on FM 1023, the world seemed to shrug off the night's events. Cattle grazed in dew-slick fields. A school bus rolled by with kids chattering behind tinted windows, and a pair of road workers flagged down construction traffic. It was the broad spectrum of normalcy that made my skin crawl. Somewhere out there, my reflection lingered in mirrors that shouldn't have existed, and voices I'd heard breathing through static still circled in the back of my mind. I glanced at Marshall. He ducked his head, then raised it, meeting my gaze. "You good?" he asked softly. I forced a nod. "We'll be fine." But the words tasted hollow. We passed the exit for Sorrel Barn Road. My memory snapped back to that first night. The boom of my boots on cracked boards, the hiss of static in the CB, the sense of something warm pressing close in the empty dark. The barn sat off the highway like a sentinel. Weather-beaten boards, doors swinging on rusted hinges. I slowed, almost unconsciously, and for a moment it all seemed to pulse with life again. Marshall elbowed me. "Don't even think about it." His voice startled me. I lifted my hand, shutting off the dome light. "Let the night stay in the mirror," I told myself. But in the corner of my eye I felt a movement. A flicker of that same patch of darkness under the rafters. I tightened my grip on the wheel and hit the gas, leaving that memory behind under the humming barn roof. As the highway stretched on, I reached down and adjusted the CB mic in its cradle. The channel was clear, no echo of the frantic whisper, no hissed breath. I tapped the PTT, Unit 3 to anyone, status, check, static answered. Then a distant officer's voice, mundane chatter about roadwork and traffic flow. It felt like an invasion of day, like the world was closing ranks around that night's secrets. I released the button and let the mic rest. I thought back to the flower-scrawled threats, the floating lantern, the aviators dripping salt, and the horde of silent figures in the fog. I thought about how each scene ended the same way, by staring straight into the eyes of something that wasn't supposed to be there, then racing away into the dark, hoping the engine's roar would drown out their voices. But each time, those voices found me again, on phone lines that cut out, on CB frequencies in my own reflection. By 8 a.m., the highway merged into the county's two-lane main road. I passed the trailer park where the mirror had warned me not to believe him. The windows of those trailers glowed under the morning sun, looking cozy and normal. I resisted the urge to check their doors, resisted that itch at the back of my mind to lean in and see if anyone was breathing there. Let the day be day. Marshall pulled off onto County Line Road and headed back toward Beeville. I knew that once he dropped me off, I'd walk into my kitchen where my son would be asleep in his crib, and my wife would be finishing breakfast. I'd scoop our boy into my arms, breathe in his baby smell, and I'd try to leave the night behind. But I knew those phantoms would tag along, nesting in the corners of my sight. As we crossed under the Welcome to B County sign, I flicked off the CB and killed the dome light. The cruiser's interior fell into cool shade. I watched Marshall's silhouette outline in black against the bright world outside. He checked his watch. "Shift's almost over," he said. I nodded, heart catching. Then I reached down and clicked the visor mirror open, glancing at my reflection. Eyes hollow, expression tight. For a heartbeat, I thought I saw movement behind me in that glass. A pair of eyes, pale and steady. I gasped, slammed the mirror shut. Marshall turned. "What is it?" I pointed at the visor, fingers shaking. I swallowed. "Nothing." He frowned, worried. "You need rest." I forced a chuckle. "Yeah, rest. Tomorrow night's on me," I said, voice too bright. He shot me a look but didn't argue. The cruiser rolled toward my street. I killed the engine in front of my house. Blue dawn light washed the lawn, picked out daisies by the porch. I grabbed my bag, hoisted it over my shoulder, then reached into the back for the evidence bag. Behind me, Marshall stepped out. "Sleep well," he called. I tried to smile. "You too." As I unlocked the door and stepped onto the porch, I felt a presence behind me. Subtle, quiet. I paused on the mat, hand on the handle. For a moment, I imagined turning and facing that thing, breathing through the still air, pressing against the threshold of my home. I pictured it standing in my living room, feigning normalcy. Coffee mug in one hand, eyes too dark to be real. I shook my head, turned the handle, and walked in. The door clicked shut behind me. Inside, sunlight streamed through lace curtains, dust motes floating like drifting whispers. My wife looked up from the kitchen table, eyes bright. Our son gurgled in his high chair. Everything looked ordinary. I set the evidence bag on the counter, swept off my hat, and sank into a chair. The quiet of morning felt at odds with my pounding chest. I rubbed my temples, blinked hard. Then I heard it. A soft exhale from the hallway. I froze, eyes darting to the dark corridor leading to the bedroom. My breath caught. I listened. Nothing. But the headlights of life in my home didn't drown it out. I rose, voice steady though my heart thundered. "Who's there?" Silence. I took a step forward. The hallway lay empty, but as I passed the open door to our son's room, I saw it. On the dresser mirror, written in steam from last night's shower. 3 letters. Simple, stark, unmistakable. C. A cold knot tightened in my gut. I'd answered the night's calls, but it would always answer back. Always waiting in the fog behind the visor, in the corners of quiet houses, in the static of every channel I keyed. I closed my eyes and whispered to the empty air, "What do you want from me?" No reply came, only that lingering breath, fading but unbroken, as if the night had followed me home, this time to stay. I pulled onto that silent stretch just east of Childress at 1:07 a.m., the road swallowed by darkness except for my headlights carving twin ribbons into the black. My name's Carter Mac McAllister, Crest County Sheriff's Office. Been running graveyard shifts out here for 20 years. By now, I know every dip in the pavement, every faded roadside sign. But that night, the road spat out something I never expected. The call came in. Dispatcher Ramos' voice flat over the radio. "Unit 23, possible stalled semi at mile marker 42.5, southbound." I checked the dash cam timestamp, flicking the mic away as I eased off the gas. I'd been on duty since 10 p.m., cups of lukewarm coffee lined up on the dash like casualties. By 1 a.m., your hands go numb, and everything you see feels oddly distant, like you're watching someone else's life through a windshield. I slowed into the gravel shoulder. No rigs, no cabs, just heat rippling off the asphalt. My engine idled. I stepped out, air so dry it scratched at my throat. The high plains wind whispered across the scrub brush, and even the crickets seemed to hush their song. I keyed the CB. "Breaker 19, this is McAllister." You copy? The hiss that answered sounded almost amused. I walked 20 paces ahead. About 30 yards off the road, a tanker trailer leaned at a crooked angle, half buried in sand. No truck, no driver. Tires sunk in the dust. Hazard lights blinking at a broken rhythm, like a heartbeat trying to start again. I thumbed my flashlight on, its beam cutting a tunnel through the gloom. The metal side glinted under the starlight, a faded company name peeling off the side. Red River Transport. Not on file as active. I circled the rig, boots kicking up dust. The driver's door hung open, latch swaying in the breeze. I called again on the CB, voice tighter. "Dispatch, I'm at the tanker." No driver. Any local traffic? Static. Then a soft chunk of broken words. Copy. As if someone half listened before closing the channel. I hit the patrol car mic. "Backup, possible missing driver, I'm going in." My hand drifted to my holster, but the gun stayed snug. This isn't about shootouts or holdups. This is the slow dread that digs its claws in. I stepped up onto the trailer skid plate, climbed in. Oil field residue caked the floor. The empty cab smelled of stale tobacco and diesel. A logbook lay open on the passenger seat, entry stopped 10 days ago. No mileage for the last run. No notes from the driver. He simply vanished from the records. I snagged the radio mic. The moment I touched it, I heard breathing, low, ragged, straining. But I was alone. I stifled a hitch in my chest. I keyed my channel. "Hello, who's there?" Only my voice echoed back. I dropped the mic. On the dashboard, a Polaroid sat face up. The tanker, in broad daylight, parked at a rest area I know well, Sweetwater northbound. But that photo was dated 2 days ago, and the rig had never shown up on that route. I shut the door and stepped back down. Wind picked up, swirling dust into pale clouds. A jackrabbit bolted past, startled. I told myself rabbits freak out at anything. But when my flashlight beam flicked across the road, I saw footprints. Heavy boot prints pressed into the center line, trailing off into darkness northbound. Only one set. I swallowed. Drivers don't stroll off like that at 1 a.m., especially not in this heat. I radioed Ramos again. "McAllister to dispatch. I have footprints. Suggest grid search along 287. No reply. I checked my radio. Dead battery icon blinking. I flipped the switch. Nothing. Swapped channels. Silent. Every comm source black. My pulse hammered. I pulled out my cell. No bars. This corner of a rural Texas can kill a signal quicker than you can blink. I tapped the mic on my uniform, hoping it was just a glitch from kicking up dust. But silence. I slid back into the cruiser, slammed the door. Inside, the computer monitor glowed faintly. System crashed. All call logs wiped. I stared at the blank screen. Every report I'd filed tonight? Gone. A soft click behind me made every nerve jump. I spun around, seatbelt buckle dropping to the floor. Nothing. I rubbed my eyes, too much coffee. I pulled my flashlight again and walked the edge of the cab. The prints continued, fresh, leading into the mesquite. I took a breath, stepped off the road. The desert grass crackled underfoot. Up ahead, a shape crouched by an old windmill foundation. I called out, "Hey, sheriff's office. You lost?" No answer. The beam landed on a figure hunched low, a man in coveralls, face turned away. I walked closer, each step slower, heartbeat loud in my ears. The man straightened. When he turned, I saw his eyes, empty, wild, shadowed by something I can't unsee. His mouth opened, but no sound came. I hollered, hand on my holster. He took a step forward, slow as a funeral march. My radio sputtered alive. "McCall?" Ramos's voice broke through, but garbled, then dead again. The man lifted his arm, pointing past me toward the rig. I looked back. hazard lights off, windows dark. The cab was empty once more. I whirled back. He was gone. The mesquite branches just sighed in the wind. My chest felt hollow. I radioed again, but the static drowned me. I raised the flashlight once more. The footprints led on, toward nothing. The sweat on my neck had barely dried by the time I convinced myself to follow those prints deeper into the scrub. Every footstep felt like an admission that I'd lost control of the scene, that the night had outmaneuvered me. My flashlight beam danced across mesquite thorns and scrubby yucca, illuminating tangled shadows that winked at me like hungry eyes. I paused at the edge of a shallow wash, sandstone banks carved by seasonal rains, where the prints stopped cold at the lip. No sign of a struggle, no blood, just the flat earth. I knelt, tracing the faint imprint of sole on sand. Mid-stride, the heel sunk 3 inches, the arch nearly level. A heavy set, but not bulky. Whoever walked here knew the land. I tapped my boots against the ground, nothing. Then a faint scent. Diesel and stale sweat, laced with something acrid I couldn't place. Diesel meant the driver, or someone, had walked here with purpose. But for what? My radio still dead, my phone dark. The rig back there sat quiet, waiting to swallow me whole if I tried to return. I scanned the horizon. No moon, only starlight blanched by distant oil flare glow. Off to my left, I heard a soft shuffle, like someone shifting weight. I froze, listened. Nothing. Then, click, my flashlight flickered. I jabbed the power button, full beam again. I cursed under my breath. I rose and headed downstream along the wash, the channel narrowing between 2 rocky outcrops. I swallowed hard, remembering the patrol briefing about lone wolf predators in this part of the county. Ranch hand scrappers who took vigilante justice into their own calloused hands. Most were myths. A handful were real enough. But legends thickened under cover of darkness. I wondered if I'd stumbled onto something else entirely. At the far end of the wash, the ground leveled, and I came across an old culvert. Corrugated steel, half buried, black inside. It looked stable enough to crawl in. I shone my light inside. At first, all I saw was darkness. Then, on the far lip, a pair of jeans cuffed at the ankle. Recognizable cut, familiar wear. I inched forward, squinting. The legs were empty, the jeans propped as if someone had stepped out and never returned. A boot lay beside them, toe scuffed and cracked. My heart jerked. I crouched, reaching for the boot. It fit my glove, size 11, brand Remington, but no name stitched on the sole. I stuffed it in my jacket pocket. The jeans pocket contained a single item. A folded business card, glossy, with embossed letters, El Paso Steel Services. Name scratched in ballpoint. R. Torres. I pocketed that too. A low drip echoed from deep within the culvert. I pressed my ear to the corrugated steel. Water? Sweat? My own heartbeat? The drip paused. The sound of whispered breathing began. Wet, labored. I shined the beam deeper, hugging the wall. The light caught an angle of metal and bone-white cloth, material too fine for work jeans. A man's rolled-up sleeve, cuff perchance on a rusted beam. I dropped low and crawled inside. The air smelled of rust and rot. My flashlight beam wavered over rubble until it found him. Slumped against the far wall, head bowed, one arm wrapped around the beam, the other drooped to the ground. I swallowed, mouth dry. He looked pale, face hidden, but alive, though barely. His chest rose and fell in ragged intervals. I crouched beside him. "Sir." "Sheriff's office," I said, voice low. He didn't move, his breath rasped. I patted his shoulder. His cotton shirt was damp with sweat. The stubble on his cheek sprang to life under my palm. I clicked my light upward. His eyes flew open, wide, terrified, unfocused. Then shot closed again. I leaned closer. "R. Torres?" I asked, holding up the card. He murmured something, but no words formed. I shook him gently. Blood glinted on his forehead, above the temple, thin trickle, dark in the beam. He'd struck his head. I eased a hand under his shoulders. He half sagged. "I'm taking you out," I told him. He whimpered, hand tightening on the corrugated edge. I braced my shoulder under his arm and hauled. He slumped forward. I half carried, half dragged him out of the culvert. Outside, the wash felt like a cleft in the world, open and exposed. I laid him carefully on a flat patch of dirt. Pulling my radio mic off my belt, I tried again. Static. My pulse drummed. I pressed the PTT. "Mayday, Mayday, Sheriff's Office. Officer down, need medical." Nothing but white noise. I flicked to emergency channel, static. I yanked my phone again, still dark. I scowled, fists tightening. Desert wind whipped across my neck. I realized I was completely isolated. I knelt beside Torres, ripping my uniform shirt to fashion a bandage for his gash. The cotton tore gritty, but I pressed it to stem the bleeding. He groaned, eyelids fluttering. I looked up the wash, dark sky, empty. No rig, no barn, no footprints, only the wash, as if I'd imagined the whole damn thing. Through the dust-choked silence, I heard the softest crunch, feet in gravel. I jolted upright, hand on my holster. The beam swung toward the tanker. The driver's door swung open again. Hazard lights blinked once, then all lights extinguished. I hissed, my flashlight flickered. The breeze stilled. A second crunch sounded, this time behind me, near the wash lip, where I'd forced that man from the tunnel. I spun, heart skittering, aiming my light, no one. Then footsteps closer. My beam caught a flash of metal, a badge. A deputy, lost, an accomplice? I swallowed, toggled my radio, still dead. Torres's breathing steadied. I looked between the badge glint and the tunnel mouth. Whoever was out there was damn near on top of me. I considered dragging Torres toward the road, toward the distance flares of passing trucks, but moving him risked losing consciousness. He might bleed out. A cold certainty jammed my gut. That figure in the dark wasn't a helper. The night had lured me off pavement into this surge of horrors, and now, whatever shadow had followed me was about to close in. I eased my grip on Torres and backed away, eyes darting between the empty wash and the tanker's dark silhouette. My flashlight trembled in my hand as I inhaled the cold night air. The badge's glint had vanished at the same instant the footsteps stopped, like someone swept it up into the dark. I pressed my back against the corrugated culvert, inching Torres's head onto my knee as I knelt beside him. The makeshift bandage soaked crimson, and every heartbeat pulsed in my temples. I whispered, "Hang on, amigo." His eyelids flickered, but he didn't wake. Behind me, the washmouth stretched into pitch black. No moon to guide me, just my fading beam. I had two choices: stay and wait for a ghost, or drag Torres back up to the rig and try to jury-rig the brake lights for signal. Neither felt right. A snapping branch echoed from the scrub 50 yards away. I turned, raising my light. Shapes, tall mesquite trunks, stretched their limbs but no figure. The drip of adrenaline in my veins froze. I supposed that whoever or whatever had been here already knew every move I would make. My radio clicked alive for a heartbeat cutting through the static. 23, then dead again. My blood ran cold. I clutched the mic and barked into it. "Send air ambulance, west of Childress, mile 42. Walker Wash." Only static replied. I glanced at the wash bank. Torres's footprints weren't there anymore, smoothed to nothing by a sudden gust of wind. I shifted my light back to the tanker. Headlights blinked twice. and then the trailer door slammed shut with a hollow crack that rattled my ribs. "Who's there?" I called, voice ragged. No answer. Then a soft metallic scrape, like a wheel bearing freewheel, came from the tanker's rear. I backed toward the cab. My boots crunched the gravel in a rush, but the tanker sat silent. My heart hammered as I slid into the driver's seat, doors locking with a decisive click. The engine fired on the first turn, roaring loud in the cold stillness. I flicked on the hazards. All 4 blinkers lit up, but the rig remained dark behind me, a black silhouette. I twisted around. Torres lay at the edge of the wash, ragged breath rising. I cut the engine. The world sounded like a rushing river. I rolled down the window and leaned out, shouting, "Torres!" His head turned, glazing over me with pain. He tried to sit up, clutching at his side. "Help! Me!" he rasped. His words were half swallowed, but I understood. I threw the cab door open and knelt beside him. Footsteps approached again, from the direction I'd originally come. My flashlight swept in that direction. 2 figures stood at the wash lip. A man and a woman, both in coveralls splattered with dust. Their faces were hidden under low-brim hats, profiles sharp in the beam. The woman lifted a gloved hand and pointed at me. Slow, deliberate. I reached for my holster, hand shaking so hard I nearly dropped my light. "Sheriff's office," I barked. "Come any closer and I'll shoot." They didn't flinch. The man tilted his head. The woman took a step forward, then stopped. Her voice trickled through the dark, low and calm. "We thought you'd left." "Left?" I repeated, heart pounding. "Left him to die?" I jerked at Torres's arm. "Not yet," the man said, voice gravelly. He glanced at Torres. "He belongs to the road now." I screamed, lunged toward them, but the world tilted. My flashlight spun out of my hand. I felt a crushing blow to the back of my head, then the ground rushed up. I woke with my cheek pressed against a cold steel, my arms pinned behind me. The final image before the night swallowed me, the 2 figures leaning over Torres, who lay on the wash floor, eyes wide, mouth opening in a silent plea. And as they reached down, I realized the greatest horror wasn't what I'd chased into the dark. It was what had been waiting for me all along. I came to with the world tilted and pulsing behind my eyes. The air smelled of hot metal and cracked earth. My head throbbed, each heartbeat a hammer blow. I pushed at the cold steel, pinning my wrist to discover leather cuffs, rutting into my skin. Beside me, the tanker's hazard lights cast everything in an unsteady orange glow. Torres lay a few feet away, unmoving except for shallow chest lifts. I swallowed against the dryness in my throat. My jaw ached, every breath rasped. The 2 figures who'd kidnapped us stood just beyond the wash lip. Faces still hidden in shadow, backs to me. They spoke in low tones, too low for me to catch words, but their body language was enough. The man's shoulders rose and fell with exasperation. The woman's stance was rigid, almost maternal in its hardness. I strained against the cuffs until my shoulder threatened to pop. No give. I glanced at Torres. His eyes fluttered, trying to focus. He coughed once, blood flecked on his lips. I forced my voice out in a whisper. "Torres, you okay?" He opened his eyes, wide, unfocused. He tried to speak, but only a hushed moan escaped. He coughed again, stronger this time, a wet rattle that made my gut clench. He started to sit up, then collapsed back. The woman stepped forward, kneeing him gently in the ribs, leaning to whisper something I couldn't hear. Torres flinched, then lay still. My mind raced. These weren't random drifters. They knew him, knew me, knew how to break us. I ground my teeth, pawing at the cuffs, my forearms burning. I forced myself to stay conscious. Closing my eyes would mean slipping away, and I wasn't going to let these ghosts have that satisfaction. Footsteps crunched behind me. The man approached, flicking his flashlight onto my face. It was cold steel, beam steady. He knelt to meet my eye level. I spat out through cracked lips, "Who the hell are you?" He studied me without answering. His hat brim shadowed his eyes. His voice finally came, low, clipped. "We're the ones who decided the road needed balance." Balance. The word stuck, rancid. I tried to process vigilantes, corrupt deputies, but his tone carried something older, an echo. Like whatever drove him had roots decades deep in these plains. He stood, stepped back. The woman took his place. She reached into her coveralls and drew out a small black box, like a detonator. "We can't let witnesses walk away," she said softly. "Not after what you've seen." My chest tightened. My mind went to the photo album hidden in my locker. Images of past wrecks and suicides, bodies left for the vultures, unreported. My own conscience had buried so many truths to keep my badge clean, but this was far worse. I swallowed hard. My voice came steady, surprising me. "You think you're God out here, dispensing justice?" She tilted her head. "Justice?" Her voice wavered, almost curious. We're the memory." A cold realization sank. They weren't killers in the usual sense. They were keepers. Guardians of secrets so dark nobody in the department ever dared expose. They'd been picking off those who smelled the rot, ensuring no one could speak. I'd walked into the heart of something that thrived in silence. Behind me, Torres groaned. I risked another glance. The man had slipped beside him, hand on Torres's chest, pressing down, keeping him from rising. Torres's eyes flicked open, saw me, and then the man's hand. Panic flared. I hungered to reach out, to drag Torres back from the brink. The woman flicked the box's cap open, a single red button gleaming. I fought against the cuffs, every instinct screaming to grab it. "You don't have to do this," I rasped at her. She paused, gaze snapping to me. In that moment I caught a flicker, regret, sadness, something human, then gone. Her finger hovered, time slowed, the wind stilled. Only the hiss of distant night insects remained. I summoned every ounce of strength. With a grunt, I twisted my body, aimed my shoulder at the cuff against the corrugated culvert. Metal rang as I rammed it twice. The cuff cracked, sprang open. I yanked my arm free, then yanked the other. They blinked. I lunged for the box. She slapped my hand, hard, twisting my wrist. Pain ripped through me. I gritted my teeth and punched her in the jaw. She staggered. The detonator box fell into the sand. The man dove for it, but I was faster. I kicked him, mid-lunge, sent him sprawling. Then I grabbed the box, tossed it away from us. It skittered into the scrub and fell silent. Torres coughed again, struggled to sit. I knelt, ripping the rest of my shirt to make a tighter bandage. He locked eyes with me, solid, grateful. I grabbed his hand and hauled him upright. "Go," I told him, voice fierce. "Get to the road, I'll cover." He nodded, pain twisting his features, and limped off toward the distant glow of passing headlights. I turned back to face them. Empty air. The culvert mouth stood open behind me, dark and silent. No sign of the man or woman, no footprints. Only the hush of the Texas night. I steadied my breath, scanned the darkness. All the comms were dead. No cajoling the radio into life. But I didn't need backup now, not from dispatch. I stalked toward the wash lip, every sense burning. Nothing moved. The only sound was my blood roaring in my ears. Then, softly, a voice. Not on the radio right beside me. "You can't save him." I whirled. Nothing. My radio crackled to life, clearer than ever. "McAllister, are you still there?" It was Ramos, panicked. "Sheriff's office, where the hell are you? We got the rig on low jack, heading your way. ETA 2 minutes. I sank to my knees, chest heaving. Relief and rage tangled in my gut. "I'm here," I said, soft. "I'm here." I looked back down the wash. Torres stood under a flickering truck stop sign a mile away, Red River Transport's logo half lit. He waved weakly. Behind him, the faded letters of Sundown blinked in and out. I felt the desert wind stir at my back, and for the first time that night let out a long breath. Because the road had given me Torres back. But it whispered in my ear, one final time, a promise I'd long suspected. Some stretches of blacktop remember everything, and those memories never truly let you go. I watched Torres disappear into the glare of the night, leaning on the promise of headlights that drew him back to life. Behind me, the culvert mouth yawned black, as if it had never disgorged a man at all. I swallowed down the ache in my ribs and turned toward the tanker, every nerve screaming to flee, but something held me. An obligation, a promise to the road itself and to every ghost it had swallowed. I hauled myself to my feet, lungs burning, and stepped forward. The tanker's faded logo glowed faintly in the moonless sky, the paint bubbling like scabbed scars across its side. I touched the metal, cold and hard, and thought of the man inside, the man I'd barely dragged free, and of every victim whose tracks vanished into the dust. I shook my head, grit spitting out between clenched teeth. This place didn't let anyone simply walk away. My hand still shook when I reached the steering column. The keys hung where I'd stashed them, silver, incongruous in the dark. I slid in, fumbling for the ignition. The engine turned over on the first try. The hum settled in my bones. I flicked on the lights, dashboard, cabin, hazards. Every bulb worked. The radio crackled weakly with static, then died. Already, I felt it slipping from my grasp. Proof, breadcrumbs, any tie to what happened here. I backed onto the highway, grit and broken shards of stone skittering in my wake. Headlights trailed me like hungry eyes. Miles of empty road stretched ahead, the horizon smeared by dust. I glanced at the rearview mirror. No barn, no culvert, no footprints. Only the dark, hard line of pavement unspooling into oblivion. I drove until dawn found me. Eyes burning, coffee stone cold in a styrofoam cup. Torres was safe, loaded into an ambulance under lights too bright for his bloodless skin. I told my story to a junior deputy who scribbled notes like she believed every word. I signed off the report as recovered subject, no further leads. The words tasted like ash. Weeks later, when the Hannaford Times ran the story, stranded trucker found in culvert after mysterious disappearance, they published my name. I didn't object. If that brought scrutiny to a stretch of road no one cared about, then maybe I'd done something right. But the article ended with a shrug. Highway Patrol saw no evidence of foul play. Nobody mentioned the pair in coveralls or the empty wash or the photo that went missing from evidence. Nobody asked how a man could vanish into a culvert and walk out again, bloodied and blank. Night after night since, I still catch my own reflection in the mirror. Pallid, haunted. I hear static in the radio when I lean in, half hoping for a call that never comes. And some nights, late on a long stretch of blacktop, I swear I see boot prints in the center line, fresh and unbroken, leading off into the dark. I pause, hand on the wheel, heart thudding, and wonder, what if the road never let Torres go? What if it only borrowed him? I drove the rig the rest of the night in a haze, headlights carving through the flat expanse as dawn crept up in bruised purples. By the time I limped into the county station, Every nerve in my body felt frayed. Torres was already loaded into the back of an ambulance, his eyes half open, the medic murmuring that he'd pull through with rest and fluids. I handed him a stiff nod, no words came, and leaned against the tanker's side, watching the sun bleed into the sky. Inside the precinct, Lieutenant Harper met me with a look that held questions he dared not ask quite out loud. He'd read the preliminary report. Recovered subject, minor head trauma, no evidence of foul play. I caught his eye and gave a tight shrug. He let it go. Some things don't survive paperwork. They parked me in an interrogation room anyway. Bright fluorescent lights, a single table. I sat, arms still sore where they'd bound me, and told them what fit. Missing driver, strange footprints, washed-out culvert, the man I found. Their pens scratched and paused, backs rigid, faces blank. When I mentioned the figures in coveralls, they glanced, down at their notes, then up, as if hearing me for the first time. No follow-up, no squad rolling out to grid the wash, just the click of badge metal and the soft hum of the overhead lamp. I left the station before lunch. The sheriff's door remained shut, my report already filed in the unresolved incidents folder. I didn't wait for an escort. Outside, my cruiser sat where I'd parked it. Clean tires, no sand in the tread. I ran my fingers along the fender, remembering the weight of Torres in my arms, the way the culvert gaped like a wound in the earth. I headed back out to Highway 287 as if drawn by a magnet. The midday sun stood high, the road baking the air. At mile marker 42.5, I pulled onto the shoulder and stepped out. No tanker this time, just the blacktop stretching north and south, silent under noon heat. I bent to brush aside a tuft of grass growing at the pavement edge. No boot prints. The culvert entrance lay 50 yards east, half hidden by weeds. I walked over. The steel mouth yawned emptily. I peered in, nothing but darkness and the faint echo of my own voice returning an empty promise. I shined my light down the sloping tunnel. No jeans cuffed at the lip, no boot, no overturned metal. Only the detritus of rats and rainwater. Bird droppings glittered on the corrugations. It looked as though it had never been disturbed. I knelt and ran my hand along the rusted ridge where Torres had been trapped. The metal was cool under my palm, as ordinary as a shed roof. I closed my eyes and listened. At first, only the wind sighed across the desert. Then, was that breath? A soft exhale behind me? I whirled, flashlight stabbing into the heat haze. No one. I stood in the hot dust, heart hammering, and realized I'd spent 20 years chasing the things people hide in the dark. Tonight, I'd seen too much of what the road could swallow. Too much of what it could give back half broken. I slid my hand into my pocket and touched the edge of a photograph. The one I snapped in the cab. The Polaroid of the tanker at Sweetwater Rest Area. I tucked it in my breast pocket, figuring it might vanish too. I pulled it out. Image faded, edges bleeding into white. The truck looked normal enough, the morning sky clear, the driver standing beside it. Torres, smiling. But someone had scrawled in ink along the bottom, "You owe the road." I folded it in half and let it slip through my fingers into the dust, watching the wind catch its corner and send it skittering toward the highway. It rolled once like a leaf, then settled at the center line. A lone semi-truck passed, tires humming over asphalt. The Polaroid lay there, face up, the written words stark against white. I turned and walked away, boots kicking up dust, shoulders heavy. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew the road would gather that image again, tuck it into some hidden place, and wait for the next driver to disappear, for the next deputy to hear static voices on a silent night. As I reached my cruiser, the engine of a pickup rumbled behind me. I glanced in the mirror. A young driver in a high-vis vest, holding a small notebook. He waved. I raised my hand, half greeting, half warning. He swung past without a glance, tires lifting dust in a cloud. I climbed into the cruiser, started the engine, and merged onto 287. The horizon glowed gold. I eased into the steady hum of a highway speed. In the rearview mirror, I caught the glint of something lying on the shoulder. White paper, fluttering in the breeze. I stroked my chin and let the road pull me onward. Because out here, you don't decide when to stop listening. You only decide when to start driving again. And I knew I'd be back. After all, the highway never forgets.